Everything seems to be okay. Let me just do one more test of sound.
Is it working?
Let's see, it should be. Okay, I'm going to admit myself. Rosta is waiting, which is fine. Oh, and so is another person.
Okay.
Let me just admit myself. Hello? 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 See if this is working. Can you hear me in the other computer?
Let me see. Say it again, hon.
Can you hear me in the other computer?
Yeah, if it's really, it needs to be turned up louder. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's working then.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Are you going to sit out here, hon? Okay. But we want to test it from here. I'll go speak from one more time.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning, beautiful.
Can you see me?
I adore you. You look gorgeous.
Can you hear me?
You sound perfect.
Okay, great.
All right, so I'm going to leave the meeting because I don't need to be in it, and we know it's working. Okay?
Great. Good morning. Let's see. So let me get my little thing. I need to get my timing. Okay, you're gonna have to help me know when to start, hon, or how to start. I don't remember.
I'll start it for you in a second. Do you want to use the bathroom?
We've got like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm so dangerous with this. No, I don't see it.
All
There,
right, so let me
it
get
is.
back
Okay,
on.
okay.
So,
This is my water.
okay, yeah, when you're ready, this admits everybody. There's 3 people now in the waiting. There's Roston and 2 people who are on the phone.
Okay, so I think we're all here.
Okay.
So I wonder why they did the phone. That's interesting. Okay. All right.
They won't be able to see any of the text.
No.
Okay. So admit everybody. It's 9 o'clock.
Then I do this. Good morning, everyone.
Hey, Jill.
Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. It looks like 2 of you are not using the webcam, that you're just using the phone. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I'm on my computer, but here we go. There we go.
Oh, wonderful. Good to see you. Now, Mercy, are you able to get
I would need to go back and forth from my phone to Zoom, but I don't know if that's possible. Do you know?
back and forth? Well, all you need is your Zoom. You don't need a phone at all.
Right, but I'm
Go
not
to
going
that
to be in one location. My Wi-Fi on my phone is much more consistent. So
Well,
I know
that's
that I
too
can stay on this and it won't be a problem. I'm just wondering if with Zoom, if that might be a problem on my computer.
bad. I have no idea, but I think it's important that you can see if you've got to have your computer on somehow.
Okay, I'll try to see what I can do on the computer.
Okay, great. Good. And Tommy, are you with us? Tommy? I don't
He
see
may have
Tommy.
turned his microphone off.
Who?
He may have turned his microphone off because I thought I heard him at first.
Yeah. Well, I want to see him. How do we get him back on? Tommy?
I may be wrong. He may not have actually been on. Let me text him real quick.
Okay, thank you. I wonder where Mercy is. That noise in the back. But maybe where Roston is. You might need to mute while we're talking. Can I look at my phone?
Your phone?
Oh. Okay.
Okay, he's texting me back.
Is he gonna jump on?
He's trying to get in through his iPad.
Oh, okay. So, are you in a place, Roston, where there's a lot of background noise, or is that maybe?
Yes, I am, and I can mute my audio when I need to.
Okay, that's fine.
I'm at a coffee shop. My house is taken over by my children, and I didn't want to go to my office on a Saturday. So.
Yeah, I don't blame you. You look great, by the way.
Thank you. Keep getting compliments now that I decided to stop shaving my head all the time.
You look really nice.
Thanks.
Yeah. So, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. Tommy just said he asked if we're able to see everyone else at this point. I thought I saw him for a second there. Oh,
Yeah, I thought I did too. Maybe I should call him and walk him through the process. Tommy O'Brien. We'll call him. Hi, are you able to get on? Oh, okay. Oh my. Oh my. Okay. Well, this is disappointing. My goodness. Okay, so
You can use the phone line.
yeah, if you need to, you can use the phone line, but you need to be able to see what we're doing. So, could he see through the phone?
No.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'll admit all and see if that helps. Yeah. You see me? Not yet. Let's see.
I see Tommy.
All right. Well, I'm glad you can see him. I don't see him yet.
Okay,
Maybe
And I see Mercedes. I hear Tommy.
there he is. There's Tommy.
There we go.
Hey, I love seeing that smile. Okay, I'll get off the phone.
Okay.
Thanks.
Sorry about that, folks.
That's okay.
Okay.
I'm glad it worked out. That's
Can you turn
great.
your iPad sideways, Tommy?
What's that?
Can you turn your iPad
Turn
sideways?
it sideways.
There we go. Perfect.
All right.
Oh,
Okay,
you look
so
much.
all we need now is Mercy. So I'm not sure what we should do about that.
Is Mercy and Mercedes the same person?
Yeah.
Okay, I see her. Mercy, your microphone's off.
So let me see if I can get her on the phone.
See, you should have it down in the bottom left corner. I think probably you'll have a mute button that you might have clicked. Nah, that may not be it. Hold on, let's see what.
Is that it?
Oh, there you go. Good.
Okay. Okay. Great. Are we all here? My
I think
goodness.
so.
We're all here.
Well, this is wonderful. So I think what I want to know, Mercy, if you can see the PowerPoint, or can you see the rest of us on your computer? Mercy? I don't think she can hear me.
She can hear.
Sorry,
Oh, there we go.
Oh, there you are. There you are, gorgeous.
Do you have a slideshow? Where would I locate that?
We're going to put that up in a minute.
Okay.
Yeah. We're just finally together. This is awesome. Fabulous. So I'm just going to, there's quite a bit of a little background going on. So yeah, Roston. Yeah, you don't need to mute. I think you're okay, Mercedes. I think it's Roston and his wonderful kids. So, can you hear me?
Well, it's
Mercy?
Starbucks. Starbucks. It's Starbucks. People moving
Oh, it's
chairs back and
Starbucks.
forth. Yeah.
Okay, no problem. All right. So, Tommy, would you be willing to open us with a quick word of prayer, and then we'll get started.
Father, we just thank you for this time, this day. We just bless this meeting and our minds to be open to hear you, Holy Spirit, and guide us through this process. Give us eyes to see and ears to hear. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 That was beautiful. So I'm going to pull up this. I'm going to have Anthony help me and pull up our PowerPoint.
Okay. And it's right here.
Okay. So,
Ask them if they can see.
can you all see this?
Yes.
Oh, good. Great. So I'm just not quite sure how to make it go
You
down.
just press that button there.
It didn't work.
There, okay. You just click down like that. Okay.
Okay. There we go. So I'm just going to review some of our goals for this time we have together today, and I think we're going to have a wonderful, engaging time. So I'm really excited about our speaker coming at 10. So we're going to start with a little devotion, and then we'll be sharing what we've learned in terms of our experience of interviewing someone who's been homeless. And then we're also going to be talking about our articles. And then start in with chapter 11 from Malik, and try to get to the root of the question, why there's so many homeless, some of the causes, and then focus on some of the counts that we've been researching. And then try to get to some understanding of the housing first model, what that really means and why it works. We're hoping to get that far. We may just get through part of that, and then at 10 o'clock, Doug Gillen will jump in and talk about how he was able to help the whole church, his church and a number of other churches begin to merge and set aside land. They're now building a mixed policy. It's both permanent supportive housing and family housing, which is an amazing combination. I didn't know there was many models of that, and after talking with Roston and realizing some of his dreams for his church, I thought, let's find a model where they're doing this. So we've got a great speaker on this. Then we'll just continue with chapter 11 and some of the frameworks for social change from my book, and then discuss the March assignments. So, and I'm hoping we can I want to talk to you about an evaluation tool for looking at different housing models. So that's kind of our plan. Here's our devotion for today. So I think I'm going to ask Anthony if he could read that for us. He's
In the late autumn, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign, I was at the fortress of Susa. Hanani, one of my brothers, came to visit me with some other men who just arrived from Judah. I asked them about the Jews who returned there from captivity and how things were going in Jerusalem. They said to me, things are not going well for those who return to the province of Judah. They're in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem has been torn down, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. When I heard this, I sat down and wept. In fact, for days I mourned, fasted, and prayed to the God of heaven.
So I really felt led to this passage, in part from my conversations with Tommy and how he's been focusing on Nehemiah. But I just want us to notice some of the key points here, and just by way of introduction so that Mercy, we all can get to know her better. I know her pretty well, but both Tommy and Roston have not had that privilege yet of meeting Mercy. So let's just take a few minutes. What are some of the things that hit you as we read this?
With this particular passage, I really think about just culturally what it's like to be exiled for such a long time, and in a dramatic experience like this. And when you have the prophet Isaiah, who preceded Nehemiah, there are a lot of things that are really spoken in the midst of exile, where it was really just painting the way forward. We're going to return home. We're going to get back to Jerusalem. And here in this passage, we see in the heart of autumn or at late autumn, they're coming back home. It says they return from captivity. And when they see what they have been dreaming and longing to return to is no longer what it was.
Yeah.
So to be devastated with great disappointment, added sorrow, I can't imagine what that would be like. And I try to draw analogies to a lot of things. It would be like, I would imagine your childhood home. You have all of these fond memories. You remember the steps to the countertop. You remember having to jump to see over it. You remember the kitchen table. You remember the smells and everything. And to see all of that burn down must have been very devastating. So I think that it really shows a very heartfelt moment where the people who just came out of exile, they have such great anticipation and faith and were liberated, but now they're at the feet of devastation. They have to rebuild this. They have to somehow, with nothing,
Yeah.
start over again. And I think that's the picture that we're looking at right now.
Yeah. I think this could be a comfort to a lot of people today that are feeling exiled from their communities because of the high cost of housing. And, it could relate to all kinds of things with immigration. What are some other insights? Who are the people coming to talk with Nehemiah?
Well, it's his family, but the thing that specifically was sticking out to me in this passage, it's the walls and the gates represented safety, and it represented being protected from any outside forces.
Mm.
And we don't really have that in our cities anymore. That's what our house represents. It was much more of a communal existence back then, and it's for us. I guess I think that the corollary would be if like the literal walls of our house were torn down around us. If we no longer had exterior walls in our house, just a shell of of what was there before, and no safety and no comfort and no ability to keep out, no ability to keep our stuff safe, but no ability for privacy, no ability to just have a sheltered life inside of where we once were able to be sheltered.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really, safety is huge, not only for people that don't have shelter, but for people that are afraid of homeless living in their community and wondering if that's going to be safe, But
I probably everybody else already knows this, but that little plus button puts you all in front of me. I didn't see. Does everybody else see that already? You've got all the pictures of all of us at the bottom of the screen by hitting the plus and the minus.
I think it just kind of depends on which platform you're using. So for me, I can see all of y'all, but I don't have like a plus sign or anything like that. But okay. I'm not you're on an Apple product and I'm on something else. So.
Okay. Well, anyway, it's good to see you all because that helps me know when to come in by just looking at your faces. For me, what I saw in this scripture was, one time they had great hope. There was an excitement, and somewhere hope was deferred, and their hearts became sick. And they came into, this is our existence, this is the way it is, this is the way it all will be. They were suppressed even by the leaders. I felt like the leaders were holding them down and keeping them in line, so to speak, and things like that. So when Nehemiah heard, he wept. I think in this group, we're called to be those Nehemiahs. We're, from what I know of the ones, I haven't met you so much, Mercy, but knowing Roston and Jill, just called to be the Nehemiah, to the rebuilding, to the hope, and for those who are desperate, to bring into leadership and say, this is possible, and this is what, and so it got into his heart and got into his very being and that made him weep and mourn and fast and pray to the God of heaven, who is the only one that can help us in America, if we're talking specifically about America here, that can possibly help the devastating circumstances that we were in a way privileged to get to see by Jill showing us, at that time, what was going on our visit to Pasadena. It opened my eyes in ways that I've never seen America before. So Roston, you're probably more accustomed to that, but I just was looking at almost a sheltered life in comparison to what we viewed and what we'll be viewing, what we're reading, what we're beginning to understand even now.
I think, Anthony wants to say something too, but I just want to mention, I think you're referring to when we went downtown to the Skid Row, and we just saw row after row of homeless folks, and they're everywhere. It's very present, and so I think when we met with Alexia the first night, and we talked about what are the things that break our hearts, what is it that makes us cry, what is it that keeps us up at night, touching into that place, and I think that's what was happening here. God was breaking Nehemiah's heart. And the response was a deep spiritual fasting and mourning. And so I think that we need to pay attention to that in our work, so that we're not just working at the intellectual level, but we're working at a deep spiritual level in all that we do. So Anthony wants to jump in and say something.
Well, Jill just said what I was going to say. I was impressed that in this passage, the prophet Nehemiah is so vulnerable that he gives himself time to really
I'm having trouble hearing Anthony.
Okay. All right. So I'm impressed that the prophet Nehemiah was able to express his feelings and to sit with his feelings long enough to really connect with the grief that he felt. And I think that's so important in the work that we do, that we really allow ourselves to feel, as Jill said, what breaks our hearts, because that's what's going to help us ultimately to connect with the God who accompanies us in our suffering and is our companion along this way as we seek justice and mercy.
Well, these are some really rich ideas. Is there any other thoughts that you guys want to share before we go on?
Yeah, I was just so I noticed back at the beginning, the first verse, that it says that Nehemiah was at the fortress of Susa. So I don't know what the fortress of Susa was, but I'm assuming by the fact that it was a fortress, that it was a place of safety for him. That was a place where he was not scared for his life. That he was a place where he could be safe. And so whenever he weeps, he's weeping for what others do not have that he himself already has, which is a really difficult thing to do. It's so hard. It's like really difficult to put yourself in the place of others in that way. It helps that they were his brothers, it says, but at the same time, like, it's so easy to say, well, I've got this and you don't. So
Yeah.
that kind of sucks, but that's not my problem. And he's like the exact opposite of that. For days, he's fasting and mourning for his brothers and friends who don't have the simple necessities that he has in abundance.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I think it makes me think about one of the core principles of Christian community development, of intentionally moving into a community of need, so that you're not an outsider, but you're part of the problems and issues and you work with the community, you know. So thanks for all your insights. I'm going to go to the next slide. And I just want to hear about some of those folks that we've had a chance to have conversations with that are without safety, without a home. Who would like to start and share about some of that? And each of us just take maybe 2 or 3 minutes each. Did you guys get a chance? Can you hear me all right?
I heard, but I did not get a chance to track down and sit with or communicate with a specific homeless person for this assignment.
Okay. How about others? Roston?
Yeah, I can jump in. Because of my job, that's something that I basically do about four or 5 times a week.
Yeah.
So honestly, it's more of a question of choosing who to talk about, because these are all people, a lot of people I don't get to talk to very long, but a lot of people I consider friends by the end of the conversation. I'll talk about one lady in particular. I won't say her name for confidentiality purposes, though you guys don't live here. So, but it's a 69-year-old, I'll say her first. Her first name is Mary. 69-year-old woman. She is unable to work. She's on disability. She's kind of the person that a lot of people would assume is just like kind of living off the government. But the amount of money that she receives from the government for her disability, both including disability as well as Social Security, because she's 69 years old, so she qualifies for standard Social Security now. The total money she gets for both of those combined is about $750.
Wow.
Which is not enough. That's enough. You can make rent on that in Abilene. You can maybe make utilities on that. But if you do both of those, your best case scenario is you've got about $100 a month left for other living expenses. And so when I first met her, I told her to do a self-check or a self-report with Adult Protective Services, which she did do. And she ended up getting Adult Protective Services helped her get an apartment. It's about the worst apartment you can get in Abilene, but she got it. But she couldn't afford it because of how little money she made. So she ended up letting a guy move in with her who is, a lot bigger than her and a lot younger than her. And he ended up taking advantage of her financially. He basically started selling her stuff, and he started to basically trying to force her out of her own place. She ended up slapping him because she was upset for what he was doing, totally understandably. But he called the cops on her, and when they asked if he wanted to press charges, he said yes. So she got an assault charge. It's a misdemeanor. It's not horrible, but it's still an assault charge. So she was in jail for 2 weeks. When she got out of jail, he had sold all of the rest of her stuff to pawn shops for money for drugs. And she didn't feel safe there, but because of the assault charge, she doesn't qualify for a lot of other services in town now. So I really thought I was going to be able to get her into our emergency shelter, but I couldn't because of the assault charge, which she shouldn't have had on her record. So I'm trying to help her get in with legal aid, but that's really, really unlikely. And other than that, it's she can pay for an attorney, which she doesn't have money for, to get the assault charge expunged from her record. But so she's just a 69. I took her back to where she's staying after we finished our assessment, and it's just there's this little tent village between the railroad track in town and one of our highways. It's about a 50-yard space between the two, and there's a bunch of tents that have popped up there, and that's where she's staying.
Wow. Every story can get so complicated so fast. Man, thanks for sharing that, Roston. Mercy, did you get a chance do you have a story you want to share of someone that's homeless that you?
Yeah, so I actually, like I mentioned, I mention this all the time whenever I engage in the work that we do. my inspiration for even being a part of this work is because of my uncle, who was formerly homeless and met his demise in that state. But on an upward note, I have a friend that I grew up with, and she was basically in the foster care system. She went from group home to group home. I think she said she lived in about 7 different group homes by the time she was 5. And her siblings, out of 5 siblings, they were all separated, which is very common. But she was still with her younger brother when, I forget the name of the organization, but they did a film pretty much trying to encourage people to take in foster children. And they were on this commercial. And as a result of that commercial, there was this single lady, basically in her 30s, that saw this video, and she said, I want to have those 2 kids live with me at my home. And that is when she moved into the neighborhood where I was, and we actually grew up together as she was in this foster home. And that actually was a very good situation. She lived there from, I believe, from about 8 years old till she graduated from high school. So we grew up together, and it was very difficult because in the foster care system, by the moment you turn 18, you're on your own. She turned 18, and for whatever reason, we're still working some things out, but she kind of cut the cord on some of her friends, and we didn't hear from her. What was going on during that time period? I'm saying this because of, this is years back when this happened. We're much older now. She said that she was homeless. She ended up getting pregnant, and she had a baby. Her foster family didn't know about it. She was very afraid of telling people because the way that she was raised was under very extreme pressure to perform, to have everything together, because if you don't, you're going to lose your position here at this house. And I guess she just carried that on with some of her friends, and she was homeless with a child. She was homeless and just in her 20s. And basically that whole, I would say about 3 or 4 year journey, she was trying to find herself. She was trying to find a way to survive. And the people that she did allow to be around her were not the best people. So she fell into drugs and different things. And it's a very rare experience for her to come out of that. She actually made it out of that. She ended up getting a job. And by having that opportunity to get a job, to be able to find a very affordable place to live, she now lives in an apartment with her daughter. And she is struggling. She finally reconnected with many of her friends, and even her biological family. So it's this coming together to a community, and even going back to her origins. She was able to meet her mom and her biological family, who are surrounding her and supporting her. So it's a very beautiful outcome to this experience of homelessness that I wish my uncle had experienced and other people. So it's very emotional for me because I don't see homeless people as other people, or I'm superior to them and they need my help and services. These are people I am equal with or even look up to. So I get a little emotional talking about it. So excuse me.
Thanks, Mercy. Yeah. So I'm sure we could go on with many people we've met in our lives that are homeless. But I think we need to move to the next portion here. Now, there was part of the assignment was to read some articles from the Shelter Force magazine. I know, Roston, you had a chance to read a couple articles that were helpful for you. Do you want to start off and share? Roston, are you there?
Sorry, I was talking. I just was muted still. Yeah, I was
Okay.
wanting to pull them up to look at them while I was talking about them, but for some reason I'm not able. It's not letting me get out of Zoom. Yeah, so I think the one I'd want to talk about was basically making the argument that public land should be used for public good, and that which I mean, so it's basically going along with the idea that a lot of times city councils are just in an effort to stimulate the economy whenever there's some kind of a proposal on the table for housing, which is going to be bringing lots of tax revenue and all kinds of different important things and jobs and new young people into a city, which can revitalize a city. One thing that is left off the table is the fact that that can also be used as a way to leverage additional affordable housing. And it was a story of a group that had worked towards trying to basically leverage California legislation, if I remember correctly, to leverage California legislation to get the affordable housing that was needed, or to get affordable housing out of a proposal before their city council. That's
Okay.
the most, I think I'm kind of conflating that with some other aspects of your own work, actually, Jill. So
Okay.
something like that.
Yeah. No problem. How about the rest of you? Did you guys get a chance to get an article or two in the Shelter Force magazine? I know I sent an article yesterday to Mercy, and I didn't know she was going to have time to read it, but I just read these two articles in the last 2 days about YIMBY. Have you guys ever heard of YIMBY? Yes, in my backyard. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You've heard of, yes. So it's such a
I
great,
read it too. Both of them. One was extremely long, but I made it about halfway. Can you guys see me? I don't know if my video is playing.
I can
me?
see you, Mercy. Yeah, I can see you.
I can't see myself, so.
No, but I can see you. So what were you going to say?
So I had never heard of YIMBYism. I only heard of NIMBYism, and it's the way that the articles that I read were a little bit. They had different angles to it. One in particular was very long, and it was talking about a lot of the negative aspects of YIMBYism, their neoliberal approach, and how they could be covertly supporting the very things that are hindering affordable housing. And it's located in the Bay Area, and kind of how the dynamics are up there. But what really stood out to me was the lack of respect for those who have been in the game for trying to promote affordable housing, a lack of connection with the community there, a lack of understanding that their actions have a direct impact on the most vulnerable there. So I think it really speaks to the importance of being well educated, being connected, and being a part of the community. The article that I read, these YIMBYs are kind of like these. It looks, just from observing through the article, it looks like a maybe middle-aged white, middle-income group who just kind of come in newly into the scene, and they just want to argue for more housing through whatever means necessary, which may not be the most helpful voice with those who have been living there for a little while. The other article, it really played on the word we, and I didn't know who we was. I don't know, who is we? Like, we have been here, we know this community, so I didn't understand whose perspective it was coming from. So it was a little confusing.
Yeah, I can see that, Mercy. When I read that, that hit me as well. And I think having read Shelter Force for years, I think I know who the we is, because for years they really are coming from a perspective from the people that have been displaced, the people that have, stayed in the communities and struggled, those people that have just experienced all kinds of hardship because of the cost of housing and being and staying in the struggle. So, but thanks for what you shared. Yeah, it's so important that we listen to all the voices and really understand what's going on. And that's a big mistake this group made. And so now it's hard, even though I love the term, yes, in my backyard, and that's what we've done in our own backyard. We have a homeless person living there, someone who was homeless. We can't hardly use that term anymore because it causes people to think about this group, which has not been so favorable. And so any other thoughts on articles you guys have read before we move on?
I will say something about the yes in my backyard thing. So that's something that I'm kind of struggling with here in Abilene. So Jill, I've told you some about this permanent supportive housing development that's happening in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
So my wife and I and some friends moved into this neighborhood 8 years ago or something like that, because from a CCD, Christian Community Development impulse to relocate. And my wife and I are the only ones that are still in that neighborhood. But this church came in, and I'm friends with this church, and I like them, and I had this conversation with them, and it's kind of a long-term conversation, but none of them live here, and none of them haven't talked with any of the people, and I'm the only person in the neighborhood that they're talking with, and I barely belong in the neighborhood. And but in the middle of that, they're just saying yeah, of course everyone's going to be fine in the neighborhood with building this permanent supportive housing complex. And because of my education, I know that it's not a negative thing. And I know that it can be a very positive thing for the neighborhood, but the conversations just aren't happening. And so it's almost like this church is saying, yes, in my backyard, to a neighborhood that's not actually their backyard. Yeah.
So they're just kind of imposing, even though it's a good idea, without any discussion.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Okay. I'm not sure what's happening here. Okay, there we go.
We lost Mercy, just FYI. I'm not seeing. We lost Mercy somewhere.
Yeah.
Here, I can't see myself, and that's a little frustrating.
Yeah, I can't. You're not usually going to be able to see yourself, but we can see you. But something happened. We can't see you now, and I'm not sure why.
Mercy, at least in my computer, in the bottom left-hand side of the screen, if I move a little bit, I see a little button that either says "Stop Video" or "Start Video." You may need to do something with that.
Oh,
there you are.
Thank you.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay.
Rostin's our technical advisor.
Yeah, we so appreciate you, Rostin, man. So, so we're going to ask the big questions of why there's so many homeless folks, and then try to describe the Housing First model. So, in your readings from the Decent Home, do you guys just want to start off and share some of the things you remember about why there's so many homeless?
First thing that strikes me in that is this didn't happen overnight. It's been an ongoing thing of policy over the years, although I think dating back to, I believe they said, the 60s, and changes in policy and changes in the minimum wage and how it affected, as well as from a builder's standpoint, it's not profitable necessarily to build affordable in a lot of cases. Now, I'm here to hear a difference for you, Jill, to show me a way of sustaining a living in that. But you really have to have a heart for it. Nehemiah had to have a heart for going there regardless of himself, But back to the question, I think this has been such an ongoing thing for decades, and how I was shown in chapter 11 how one policy or another can affect the total social change for, in this case, for the bad and not
Yeah.
for the good. So,
That's really powerful insight. That you really summarized it well, Tommy. Thanks. Any other thoughts on the chapter before we kind of go through some of the details on why there's so many homes?
Well, and so this isn't really about why there's so many homeless. 'Cause Tommy kind of gave a pretty good overview of that. So I work for one of the programs that's kind of in the stopping the bleeding category of, all of the wounds that have been handed to our country through all that legislation that Tommy mentions. But it really doesn't seem like we're making much progress.
Yeah.
It feels like it's stopped. Like it's stopped getting worse. Maybe I don't know. Like I'm pretty unconvinced it's not getting worse. But it's definitely not getting better. With all and at the same time, I think about the HUD program that I'm part of. Our funding is $2 billion a year. Like that's hardly anything, and that's like the one HUD program that is specifically designed for ending homelessness. I mean, you triple that, and we could get close, but that's still just a fraction of that's a fraction of a fraction of the budget. But yeah, I mean, what Tommy said, that the whole, and it's not as simple as this, but in a lot of ways, it's just the age-old, stagnating wages and spiking rents is just such a, and then the deterioration of so many of the social services that were kind of stemming back the tide. The deterioration, a couple of the different categories of welfare that what's often called welfare that were mentioned in the book. Like those are things that at one point were actually pretty helpful, but at this point, I mean, I don't know anyone. I know a lot of folks that are on the streets or about to be on the streets. I don't know anyone that's figured out how to game the system in the way that a lot of people that it's kind of like the stereotype of the Reagan. What was the Reagan welfare queen thing? I wish I knew her, because if I knew her, I'd try to teach some of my friends how to do what she's done, because it's just not working for so many people.
Yeah. Did you want to say
Yeah.
something? So Anthony wants to say something.
I'd just like to add one observation of this mix is sometimes well-intentioned policies can have unanticipated consequences. There was a time when there's a lot of concern about the institutionalization of mentally ill people, and they were kept in holding tanks. They called them sometimes snake pits. They were so badly run. And many people wanted to deinstitutionalize the mentally ill, and it was a good policy in theory. It was a bipartisan effort. Conservatives liked it. They thought they could save money by closing down these mental institutions, and liberals thought that they could have community-based homes for the mentally ill that would be better than these big institutions. Unfortunately, what ended up happening was the mentally ill were just dumped onto the streets, and we really haven't created the kind of housing for them that they need, and that's contributed to the homeless problem. And that's why I was very pleased that our state passed a ballot proposition that would provide housing for the mentally ill, community-based housing, because that's what they really need.
Yeah.
And that's how we can address the homelessness problem and also the problem of mentally ill people on the street.
Yeah, I never quite put all that together, Reagan and policies in California, and then what they finally got passed. We were actually part of helping to craft the talking points at the state level for that policy. So let's see. So before we kind of get into more of the details on why there's so many homeless, it's important to define that. And so basically it says here that any private space intended for sleeping can qualify as a home as long as those who sleep there have a legal right to be there and can exclude strangers. Homeless have become those who have no private space of their own. So this doesn't necessarily include, couch surfing and people doubling up, which is a definition often used by school districts to include that. But would you guys say this definition does a pretty good job of describing homelessness?
I'm a little confused because with the Altadena count, it included in the homeless count campers, RVs, things like that, which would be private.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I think the question there, so assuming that was a HUD point in time count, that would have been, I'm assuming, like there may be some difference in California, but I'm assuming that would have been campers that were not connected to utilities. So that wouldn't be someone who's like a millennial who's boondocking or something like that, like who's got like a solar panel on the roof. This would be like just not connected to utilities, not connected to water, not able to like flush a toilet, that kind of stuff. That would be the HUD. That would be how an RV would fit under HUD's definition.
Well, there's a lot of different definitions. I found this one. It's the official U.S. Department and Urban Development definition. It's pretty detailed, and it does mention in the second point about vehicles. An individual has a primary nighttime residence that is a public or private space not designed for ordinary use as a regular sleeping accommodation for human beings, including a car park, abandoned building, bus, or a train station, airport, or camping ground. So there's a lot of different definitions out there. And so it's going to depend on your jurisdiction and how they decide to define that. There's some national definitions. School districts sometimes have even unique definitions from school to school. So,
so I'll just throw in there, and like in Texas, that if that RV was not connected to utilities, it would fall into the category of an abandoned building.
It would, okay, if it wasn't connected to.
And can I add that in many areas in this near LA, you can be fined $500 a night just for sleeping in your car if you don't have a regular address. So if you or I, who have a regular address, just want to sleep in our car because it's late at night, 2 a.m., it's fine. But if we don't have a regular address, we can be fined.
Yeah, it's really a policy very biased against homeless. South Pasadena passed that policy last year or 2 years ago, I think. Did you want to say something, Mercy?
Well, I mean, it could be a little annoying because I can get into all the little nuances of policy, but what about those people who live off the grid? Like they intentionally do not want to be, utilities, they want to be literally disconnected from that on purpose. What about that?
Yeah.
That was like the boondocking that I was referencing a minute ago. Like if that's it gets into little details about like whether or not it actually qualifies. Like someone can choose that and still be homeless. But again, it gets in the nuance.
And I think even using the word homeless, there's so much stigma connected to that, and how important that is it really to label yourself and to be labeled. So there's just a whole big discussion we could talk about. But in order to really address homelessness, there has to be some sort of a definition. And I think the one that most of us work with a chronic homelessness, is this one. individuals with a disabling condition such as substance abuse, mental illness, have been continuously homeless for a year or more, or had at least 4 episodes of homelessness in the past 3 years. So I think this is the most recent definition they've come up with. I know it's changing a little bit every year. Roston, is this what you recall as the most recent definition for chronic homelessness?
Yeah, the only thing I would add, and this is something that I'm needing to get back with Texas Homeless Network about. So that very last one, the or more, or had at least 4 episodes of homelessness in the past 3 years. At least the way that has been described to me as most recently, that is that they 4 or more episodes in the last 3 years, totaling 12 months or more. So it's not just 4 or more episodes in 3 years of less. It has to be still more, 12 or more.
Yeah. Yeah, this was really intriguing. We have a friend named Leventine who has just started knocking on our door and hanging out at our house in the last couple of years. And we finally got him into housing. He's 20 years old, so he was still considered to be youth, to be able to get youth housing for homeless. But when we were trying to get that housing, I had to actually go back and figure out which dates he was homeless and for how long. And it was nerve-wracking to help that team figure out if it worked with this definition so we could get in the housing. So I think I see, Roston, I see you're shaking your head. Can be a real challenge to really come up with how to make sure someone qualifies for this so they can get housing. So, so I think our speaker might be here. And so I don't know quite how to see that. Can you help me, hon? I think he may be waiting. I'm not sure.
Let me stop share for a minute. And I see that there's four people.
But it said a minute ago there was 5. So 1 person waiting right there.
1 person waiting, admit. Okay, there we go.
Hello.
Hello there. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. We got you here a few minutes early. This is great. Yeah. So you're just on the phone, right?
Right. I don't have a camera in my monitor, so I'm unable to hook up that way.
Okay. Well, we're going to get your picture up here, Doug, so they can at least see you. And,
all right.
So this is not.
Try not to scare him away.
Oh,
We just need to get back to the PowerPoint
okay.
and get his picture up
Okay.
there. There we go.
All right.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to introduce you guys to Doug, and maybe he can fill you in as well, a little more about who he is. But I know his background is in insurance, and he's the chairman of the board of trustees for the Santa Ana United Methodist Church. And I learned about him recently through this amazing woman named Sandy. How do you pronounce her last name, Doug?
Ferruda.
Ferruda. And she's been hired by the United Methodist Church, their conference in the, what does that cover? Most of California?
CalPAC. It's California and Pacific Islands.
Okay, so her role is to help churches re-envision their land and how it might be used so that it stays within the mission of their church. And so it won't be like sold to a high-end developer, but still have something in line with their mission. And then a lot of the churches, United Methodists, not a lot, but some have really been struggling with membership. So they've got large space and large buildings, but not necessarily large congregations. So she is the one that told me about Doug. And so I've had the joy of having some awesome conversations with him and back and forth emails in the last week. So I just want Doug to start off by telling us, just describing an overview of the project. Is it 93 units total, or is it 92?
93 units total.
Okay, just give us just a quick snapshot of what the end result is going to look like.
Okay, just to introduce myself, my name is Doug Gillen. I am chairman of the Board of Trustees for Santa Ana United Methodist Church. I spent about 30 years of my life in manufacturing and warehousing as middle management, and the last 15 years I did loss control surveys for major insurance companies across the western United States. My education background is I have a bachelor's degree in organizational management with a certificate in international business. And I retired in 2015, and for the last, well, I'm currently on my second term as a member of the Orange County Grand Jury. The project that Sandy mentioned is interesting. It's a downtown church site that we've got. It has been a church site since 1900, and we have some buildings on there that have well past their prime and are basically red tagged, so we can't use them anymore. It covers 1.74 acres, and it's as Joe mentioned, we're going to put 93 units on it. It will be a mixed use, permanent supportive housing for about 32 units, 1 unit for the property manager who will be on site all the time, and then the other units will be 1, 2, and 3 bedroom facilities for residents of affordable housing. It's going to be really interesting because we do have a problem here in Santa Ana and in Orange County with housing that anybody can afford. Our problem here in Orange County is that currently right now 1 and 2 bedroom unfurnished apartments are going anywhere from $1,900 to $2,500 per month. And it just prices so many people out of the housing market.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that overview. So it'll be a combination of family and homeless housing. And I really appreciated you sharing more about your background too, Doug. No wonder you're so good at what you do with your organizational development skills. So I want to ask the first question about the turning point when this outsider came in, Sandy, and kind of was the spark. And your team basically had a 180-degree turnaround. Tell us about that.
That's correct. It was interesting because our board of trustees, by discipline by the United Methodist Church, we have the responsibilities for all church assets. We are basically the stewards, and we had this property downtown, and as I mentioned earlier, it was in pretty bad shape. We were in the process of considering, do we just sell this and walk away from it? And one of our pastors brought Sandy into the conversation, and the minute that she had made her presentation, as the meeting concluded, the board of trustees who were present in that meeting basically walked out of the room about 2 feet off the ground, because it was a whole new understanding of what we could do with that particular parcel of land. And I think at that point in time, this kind of set the wheels in motion, got us thinking, and it was by the grace of God that very shortly thereafter, there was an article in our local newspaper about a Garden Grove United Methodist Church who, here again, had a large parking lot that covered 2.2 acres that was way underutilized. And they had converted that into affordable housing for families on the south end. And on the north end of the parcel had also built a separate structure for low-income seniors. And in the middle of this project, they had also put in a Head Start structure for the local neighborhood. So we met with them, met with their developer, and began the process of talking to other developers as to what we could do with our particular property. One of the things that we were kind of key on in doing this is we didn't want any surprises. So our process of going forward with this was that we had each of the developers meet us at this downtown site first, just so they knew that what they were getting into. Then we had them open up one of their facilities so we could take a look at it. And then we had them make a town hall presentation of what their vision was for our particular site. And Sandy gave us a very interesting kernel to work with in our conversation. She mentioned a very small church up in Los Angeles that here again they wanted to unload a parcel of land and were even where the location was, they were only going to get somewhere between $350,000 and $400,000 for it. And they decided to repurpose the property based on demographics that they had of the local area, which showed a high number of young people who had aged out of the foster care program. So they were in this never land of 19 to about 24, and some of them were living on the streets or were couch surfing on friends' places. And so they repurposed this church site into 19-unit apartment complex specifically for foster kids who had aged out. And there was a little pushback initially from the local neighborhood, but once they started seeing the plans, local churches also embraced the project and adopted apartment units and provided linens and furniture and gender-specific items so that when the kids moved in, they had their own apartment already set up. It was all fully stocked. And there were community services in the area to help them with their finances and job searches and things like that. So it became a real blessing for the community for this particular group. And
Awesome.
that got us started on how to go forward.
So it sounds like you guys had a tour with your board of trustees, both the Garden Grove and then to this other site in Los Angeles.
Well, actually, we did a tour of all three developers' sites. We had one in this one in Garden Grove was our first tour. Our second tour was a project out here on the 91 freeway in, I think it's almost Yorba Linda, Anaheim, by one of the other developers. And you look at the project and you think, oh my gosh, these are craftsman style apartments, but they were low income housing. And then we had another developer who had work in Los Angeles and Long Beach. And so we saw two of their projects up in Willowbrook and in the Compton area.
So early on, you guys hired a real estate lawyer. This was the recommendation of Sandy. By
Right.
this time, at what point did you hire a real estate lawyer?
Probably about the same time that we were wrapping up the tours, because at this point in time, we wanted to format, a request for proposal to go out to these three developers that we had picked, and just have them formalize their vision for what the product was going to look like. Sandy had connections with a firm in downtown Los Angeles, and we met with them and with Sandy and kind of spelled out what our vision was, how we wanted this to go forward. And unless you've got people close by who are experts in these type of documents, we felt we were way in over our head. And so we thought we've got to get some expertise in with this, because we're talking about, well, this particular project alone, once we get it done, is going to cost $47 million. And we want to make sure that we've got the T's crossed and the I's dotted appropriately. And there has been some churches here in Southern California, one out in the Inland Empire in specifics, who went it on their own. And now there's all kinds of accusations of financial malfeasance and conflicts of interest. It's been very destructive for the church. We wanted to stay neutral, but we also wanted the expertise.
Yeah. So I would say this was probably one of the best practices of a church or an entity wanting to develop a site, is to hire a good real estate lawyer to help you walk through this process. So the team, tell us about who was on this team, and especially considering that you're a multicultural church.
Well, just to give you a background, our board of trustees is comprised, well, let's go to our church first. Our church is actually 5 congregations, 5 ethnic units. We have a Filipino congregation, we have a Cambodian congregation, we have a Tongan congregation, we have a Hispanic congregation, and we also have an Anglo congregation where some of the Filipinos who are a little more fluent in English worship with us. So 5 diverse ethnic groups, and our board of trustees is a pool of 9, and there is representation on the board from each of the ethnic ministries. And as I said earlier, the church property is under the legal banner of the board of trustees. And so the initial team was the board of trustees and pastors who, again, were invited from each of these ethnic groups to join us in these tours and meetings. And then each of the town halls that we held for this were held at the church sites so that the ethnic congregations on a Sunday afternoon could meet and hear the presentation. One of the things we did in those particular meetings was have an attendance sheet so that we wanted to know who was there. And later on, if somebody said, well, I didn't know about it, it's blindsiding, you didn't tell us, we knew who was there, and the opportunity was, broadly broadcast from the pulpits. So all of the ethnic groups knew what was going on. If they chose not to show up, then, the board says, we have representation on our board, so you do have a voice in this. But the team itself was through the Board of Trustees and the pastoral staff.
I just want to interject a comment right here. Planning meetings and their time is one of the hardest and most important thing we do in any kind of organizing. And I'm thinking of the city right now. We've got, and when we're in a democracy, our local city planning departments and housing departments are required by law to do community engagement. But trying to find a time when all different people can participate in that, oftentimes it's only during work hours, it's not in the evenings, and it's not in different languages. So you guys are well ahead of what our city should be doing. So thank you for that kind of organizing.
And we did have to go before the Planning Commission and also before the City Council. So we were able to carve out time, and some of our people made the sacrifice in the evening to come down to City Hall and actually state our case in front of the Planning Commission and in front of the City Council. And I think that carried a lot of weight. So there are opportunities, but the developer did an awful lot of the legwork up front.
So give us some of the steps for your visioning process. I know that the Bible was key in this, in your visioning.
Right, and I think one of the things, without being irreverent, in Matthew 25, Jesus talks about, when I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. And we've kind of put our own little paraphrase along that, when I needed a place to live, you made a shelter for me. So our community in this particular area where we are at, this is a very interesting part of Santa Ana in that it is part of what would have been low-income housing going way, way back. It was also a barrio. I've lived in the city since 1952, and the Logan Lacey barrio was basically where a lot of the farm workers lived. Just doing a check on that community recently, about 80% of the people who live in that area are renters. And you understand the history of Santa Ana. There was this particular area where our church is situated is a very low income, has been historically, and a lot of the housing here in Santa Ana right now is single family homes, but there's no longer single families in them anymore. As an example, I have a 2-bedroom house across the street. I have 11 or 12 adults and at least 6 kids living in it and 8 cars. And it's because they can't afford to buy a house or support a house here on their own. Our particular church, Santa Ana United Methodist Church, is quite unusual in its history, in that the city of Santa Ana was founded in 1869. And at that point in time, our first Methodist church was also founded here in 1869. And about 4 years later, another Methodist church was founded in Santa Ana. And I scratched my head looking at the history of this, and finally somebody explained to me what happened 4 years before 1869. And it was the end of the Civil War. And we actually had 2 Methodist churches here in Santa Ana. One had sided with the South during the war. That was the church that was formed in 1869. And we had another church that had sided with the North during the Civil War. That was the church that was founded in 1873. And then about 1879, along came a bunch of German immigrants who held their services in German, and they were the Zion Evangelical Church, and later they merged with United Brethren Church, and then ultimately they merged with United Methodist Church and became Santa Ana United Methodist Church through a merger of about 7 years ago, where we realized we had 3 campuses, dwindling, memberships, and we sold one parcel of land up in the northern part of Santa Ana and have used that money to repurpose our largest campus, which covers about 4.5 acres, so that we could put all 5 congregations on one site. And our developer has really been the key to making this project go forward, in that they became a key member of our team from the get-go. Once we had established who we were going to work with, they have been, I would say, the mechanisms whereby going through the planning commission, meet and greets with the movers and shakers in the Santa Ana, talking to city council members. They have done layman's work as far as getting the thing going. And when we set up our partnership, one of the things we looked at was who were the other players that were going to be on board for this. And so as a co-developer in this particular project, we have a group called Mercy House. And Mercy House has been very key here in Santa Ana, helping with the homeless situations. They have been working with the county, and they have a 200-bed shelter up in Anaheim called Bridges at Kramer. They just opened a new facility here in South Santa Ana called Link. They took an old factory, basically, and converted it into housing for families and for single men and for single women. Did that in a matter of 28 days with the help of the city to get people off the street. And then our architect for this particular project has done an awful lot of work for the city and the county. So we wanted a team who was familiar with how to make this project go forward. This is one of the reasons we sort of shied away from this one organization who had facilities up in Long Beach and Los Angeles. They knew the players up there, but they were really not that familiar with who to go with down here. And so
let me just jump in real quick here. I'm going to reiterate a few key points that you've made. I noticed you used the word co-developer, and that's pretty amazing that you found a developer willing to even allow you to think in those terms. So I know that was one of your key 14 questions, that you'd be involved as an equal player in that way. Then you mentioned the scripture that was really your foundation. You really listened to the community. I know when we were talking, you said that it was within a mile of the church. You really did your homework. You learned what the neighborhood was, the history. And then you looked at the history of your own church and some of those root divisions clear back in the 1800s as a result of racism. And now how the church is all coming together now on the same campus. So it's just a beautiful story of all of these things culminating in your land use. So can you just talk to us about those 14 questions and how you guys came up with those as a team?
Well, this again, I think, goes back to the conjunction with the real estate lawyer, because we hammered these out between our board of trustees and our pastoral staff, but we also floated this by our real estate lawyer to make sure we were asking the right questions. In discernment, I'll use an analogy here coming from my experience with the grand jury. If we are doing an investigation and we've got somebody in front of us that we are asking questions of, but we don't ask the right questions, we will get the wrong answers. So we had to format the 14 questions based on what we really needed to know from these 3 developers. We were concise in asking, looking, say, for instance, question number 9, it says, will your organization act as the contractor for the project, or will you use a third party? This is part of our discernment process, is we wanted a one-stop shop for the developer. So were they going to be the property management, or was that going to be farmed out to somebody else? Were they going to be the contractor? Was that going to be a third party? This way, we have a one-stop. If something we need addressed, we go to one person. We don't have to go, well, that's not my responsibility. It's over here with somebody else. That was also part of question number 11. And then knowing that we were going to have residents who were either coming out of shelters in the permanent supportive housing group or families who were struggling financially or socially, this is one of the reasons we asked question 12. What social services do you propose to be offered at the project, and how will these social services be funded? And it just happens that our developer that we selected is in partnership with a group called Hope Through Housing. And so they have got everything right there at their fingertips. We don't want to have to go out and reinvent the wheel. We wanted it basically to be as quick and as much of a plug and play as we possibly could to get the project up and not have to go around and around and around just to try and get things resolved.
Great. We've been looking at your handsome face for a while here, Doug, and I think just to take a break, I'm gonna, I've got more questions, but I want you to, right now what we have up on the screen is a picture of the rendering
Okay.
of the project, and tell us a little bit about your partnership with the city in terms of the streetcar, and how your chosen developer is now Renaissance.
I don't see the rendering that you're talking of. I see his picture.
Okay, that's
too.
interesting. Okay, so how do we make this work? Can you help me figure this out, huh?
Just don't keep. Okay, that's not.
I'm just, I know, I don't know how to make it work.
Okay, so you can't see it right now?
No, they can't
No.
see it.
All right, let me see if, share.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
You
Okay.
can see the picture?
Okay.
Okay. So, so Doug, I know you can't see this, but you know the picture well.
The one with the street level, with the streetcar down in the lower right-hand corner?
Right, uh-huh. So tell us a
Okay,
little bit about the picture.
Okay, we had nothing to do with the streetcar. That was actually a project from the Orange County Transit Authority, and it was just a blessing that we wound up with the streetcar stop right at the lower corner of our property. But we are in what is classified as a transit zone. We are 0.7 of a mile from a regional transportation center, a heavy rail, if you will, where there's 56 trains going through there every day for Metrolink or for Amtrak. So we are within a walking distance of a major transportation hub. And let's see, 2014 Orange County Transit Authority basically took over this particular project and got funding from the federal government to put in a fixed guideway system, if you will, streetcar. And one of the stops just happens to be right at that lower end of our property. And in working with the city on this, because we are in a transit zone, we were able to wind up with vouchers for our residents for transit use, mass transit use, for a period of 9 years. So bus passes and things like that will be available for our residents if they choose to use them. And there's major north-south bus corridors in Santa Ana within a 2-block walk. And there's transportation all over the place to try and make it more easy for the residents there. We're only about, let's say, 8 miles from the Disneyland Resort area, and a lot of the people who are housekeepers and work in the resorts live down in this area. So if we can provide transportation for them, they can take the streetcar over to a bus line, and then one transfer, and they're up to where they would work in the Anaheim area. So we were very, very fortunate in this. We had nothing to do with how it wound up at our doorstep, but we're blessed that it's there.
Let me just jump in here, and then we'll take a few minutes for questions before we talk about some of the finances and other ways that this partnership has been such a blessing. I wanted to mention how when there's a lot of advantages when you have public transportation close to your development. Obviously, you can minimize the number of parking spaces on your site, and that's a huge. We've talked during the first week we were together how it's about $30,000 per parking space, especially, and maybe even close to 35 or 40 if it's underground. So that's a huge savings for your project. And also in California, we have what's called cap and trade. It's a funding source that you can get if you're close to a transportation corridor. It's a real creative funding that they've come up with to help address environmental concerns. But then there's can sometimes be a mixed blessing by having your project right on a transportation line like this. In my book, I feature The Point. It's a housing development put together by a Christian developer in Denver, and they're right on the main corridor for a transit, and it stops right in front of their big, beautiful building. And because of that, they've been able to bring into this very under-resourced community a lot of folks looking for cheap housing that are higher end folks that are just not finding anything even they can afford. So this entire community in Denver has now flipped, and there's hardly any affordable housing left, in part because it's so easy to get to this area because it's right on a transportation corridor. So so there has to be some kind of price controls. In our local advocacy here in Pasadena on Tuesday, we're going to be having a speaker about increasing density in some of these transportation areas. But there can be a mixed blessing, if you don't have enough anti-displacement and price controls and tenant protections in place. So Doug and I had a little conversation about some of that, but I'm just kind of sharing some of my thoughts. What are some other thoughts and questions some of you have before we jump into the next part of this presentation? Do you guys have some questions for Doug?
Well, I would just, I was wondering about the 14 questions that they assembled, and if it would be possible to get a copy of those questions.
Yeah, I sent those a couple days ago for you guys to read in advance, and so it may be that got kind of hidden somewhere in your emails, but
Okay.
But check your email and make sure you did receive those. Yeah.
I have some questions. I'm very interested in the financial component and the story behind it. How did I'll break it into like two parts. How did your church come to the realization that they really care about this issue? And I'm sure that there are many different levels of income. How did they come to really see this as a necessary investment in the community? And then the other part is the financial part. How did you guys, how much money did you have to come up with? You mentioned 40 million. There are a lot of small churches that might be land rich, but not cash rich. So what would you tie in for churches like that who would also share this desire to provide affordable housing, but they have a lot of land and not very many resources? So it's kind of a two-part question.
Okay, let's work from the back forward, because the church basically has no skin in the game other than the property that we own. The assessed value of the dirt for this particular parcel is $4.7 million. That's the only thing that we bring to the table. The city of Santa Ana, there's a bill, it's called SB 50 here in California, that it's called I'm scratching my head here, density agreement, and basically the city subsidizes the building of affordable housing, and we had to go before the city council in order to approve that. So the city council signed off, and we got a guarantee from the city for $3.17 million as sort of an earnest money, if you will, going forward into the project. here in California, we just passed a piece of legislation last year called AB 448, and the state of California is going to put $450 million out there in grants for affordable housing. So our developer just a couple of weeks ago put in our application. We will not know until June whether or not we've got it. But then beyond that, in order to finish up, that will be, we're asking for $20 million from the state. So that still leaves us about $24 million to the light. But there are tax credit bonds, either 4% or 9%, that are available for people to get tax credits to help build these kinds of projects. So the developer is key to making that happen. The funding streams are crucial, because if you look at the 14 questions, I think it's number 4 and 5, we start looking at what, 4, I think, is what difficulties do you anticipate in the development and financing of the project. We've had, like I said, we have a very aggressive developer with this particular project, and they have built, let me think, 9,000 units and have 27,000 residents basically under projects that they have completed. So this is not their first rodeo. They know basically how to make the money flow to get the project going. It's, part of the determination and the discernment, I think, when you start looking for a developer to build a project like this, that they have to be able to bring the resources. To expect a church to pony up that kind of money to make a project work is just, no church that I know of here in Southern California, short of maybe some of the large mega churches down here, can put that much money on the table at one point in time and to guarantee a project.
I was kind of thinking about the Trinity Church in New York. They're just gigantic, so they can afford it.
Yeah, and there are a few. I mean, Rick Warren here in Southern California with his particular project. There might be some aspects of, say, Calvary Chapel or some of the other mega churches here that might be able to put that kind of, juice into a project like this. But one of the things we did look at in the context of the community, we were really, really sensitive to where Santa Ana is. We've got if you penciled out, say, for instance, somebody in California who is making minimum wage, which is $15 an hour, if they were going to afford an apartment of 2 bedrooms, they got a wife, 2 kids, and they were going to afford an apartment that was penciling out at $1,900 a month, they would actually have to be making $32 an hour to afford that if you use the 30% rule of how much your net income should be and how much of that should actually go towards housing. So Orange County is, as is most of Southern California, and even the Bay Area is worse, trying to find housing that can be lived in and have somebody afford to live there. One of the stipulations in our rent is that people will have to bring in, pay stubs and stuff like that, and the rent is predicated on 30-60. We have very low, and moderate income streams, and that's basically capped. This project will not flip because it's part of the funding stream says we have to continue to have people of those income streams as part of the project.
And what's the time? How many years will this be? Is it a 55-year price control?
It's a 65-year ground lease. Here again, the questions that you're looking at, the 14 questions, those were hammered out with input from our real estate attorney. Then we got into a letter of, once we got those responses back and we decided who we wanted to go with, we held a vote with all of the members that were present that could make it in order to decide who we wanted to use as our developer. We went through some rough spots in that because there was some of our congregation who said, well, we need more retail in there. And so there was a necessary almost backtrack that the developer went out and did a market study within about a half a mile of where the project is and says, yes, retail is possible, but the problem is that there, you know, if the retail space is empty, you're making no income off of it, whereas housing is, you know, everybody wants a place to live. So, and some of our congregation members come from countries where zoning and construction codes are a little more lax, and so for some of them it was a struggle to realize that, you know, we just can't do what we wanted to do with this particular project. There were rules.
Doug, I've got the PowerPoint up that you presented to the congregation. So I'm going to
Okay.
flip through that. Right now we have the first page, the Legacy Square, which the great name that you called it Legacy. Can you all see this? Let me know if you can see this.
Yes.
I can see it.
You can see. Okay, so let's just kind of, I'll say verbally where we are, Doug, so you have an idea of what we're going through.
Okay.
The next one, huh? So they chose National Community Renaissance as their developer and presented their credentials. You guys have actually all seen one of their developments when you were here in California. It was the Marv's Place down on Union and Fair Oaks, or Union and Mar Vista in Pasadena, the family housing, and it's gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. So they really do have won a lot of awards nationally. I know a lot of the folks that work for Renaissance. So
Yeah, if you're looking at the slides, Jill, number 3, where it's National Community Renaissance, and there's pictures of 4 housing projects. The one in the top left is actually Oak Crest that we saw out in Yorba Linda.
okay, yeah, that's my hometown, Yorba Linda. Good place.
All right.
And
Yeah,
the one
that's a beautiful. It's a beautiful project. It's right off the 91 freeway, and they've worked with the local school district. So there's a school bus that drops the kids off right in front of the project and picks them up there every morning. And then when they drop off at that particular site in the afternoon, the community center, which is kind of in the center of that particular frame, there are people there from the Boys and Girls Club who come there and work in the afternoon with homework club for the kids. So it's off the bus and into the homework club. Mom and dad come home from work, pick them up, and you know it's all very nice. And the kids, there's actually a computer lab in there as well with about a half dozen computers. So the kids have got it all self-contained.
So when you're looking for a developer to partner with, that's one of the key things. Oftentimes developers will think the whole picture, not just the housing, but how are you going to break that cycle of poverty to make sure the next generation also won't need affordable housing. So in the bottom right, do you see that picture? That's actually Marv's Place. That's here in Pasadena, the one that some of you saw we drove by. So why don't we go to the next slide? So Mercy House, Doug mentioned how this is one of the key partners to provide the social services. So it's permanent supportive housing. It's permanent. Obviously, it's not a shelter. It's not transitional. And this, we know that's what ends homelessness, but it's also the supportive part. And so there's always got to be a partner with someone who can do that. And that's what Mercy House is. Any comments about Mercy House?
They've actually got houses, Jill, that are specifically for people who are HIV, and then others for people who are maybe having some mental or psychological problems. So the services in each of those homes is specific for the residents, which is really a blessing for them, because you don't have to be going all over town to find somebody to talk to about your elements.
Yeah, and that's one of the best practices of permanent supportive housing, that services are right on site. So, yeah.
Jill,
Next
you were
slide.
asking if we had any questions about that. So,
Yeah.
So Mercy House provides the case management. Did they already have the funding in place and the capacity within the organization to just say, great, we'll just start providing case management? And if not, where did they get the additional funding to add more case management to their staff?
Doug, can you answer that? Do you know?
Well, actually, Mercy House is part of the case management, and as will be Hope Through Housing, which CORE brings along. And so it's going to be actually a team effort on both of the supportive sides for case management, being from a permanent supportive housing or from a family need. That they will have
What about their
programs that are
funding? How did
funding.
that-
I think some of it comes from federal and from state. And this is one of the things that in PSH, one of the things we found is that you have to identify where the person is and what services they are eligible for, be they be veteran or, you know, in a special category, so that you can target the funding specifically towards them and to help them move on in their life.
So the people themselves, once you've identified their concerns, that's where part of the funding comes from.
Right. It's based on tailored supportive services, basically.
Yeah. Why don't we go to the next slide, and feel free to jump in as you guys have other questions. This slide is the development objectives. So to address a specific need in the community, to tailor supportive services, as you were just mentioning, focused on the specific need of the community, and then neighborhood compatibility. So if you guys noticed, it was a pretty tall building, and I asked Doug about this, if that was appropriate, if there were other buildings that were of that height. And so I think maybe you could speak to that, Doug, if that was an issue, the density question.
Yeah, and this is why we brought in SVA as our architect, because they were very familiar with what city code and county code and project code for this particular type of structure would permit. And so they looked at it from the standpoint of, you know, they did some studies of the buildings around there and actually took photographs and integrated that into the design for the exterior of the building and the capacity of the property. You mentioned parking spaces earlier. Since we do have 93 units, we were mandated to have, I think it's 102 parking spaces. And the irony is that 6 of those parking spaces have to be specifically for electric cars. Now, being the cost of an electric car like a Tesla, I don't think many of our residents are going to be able to afford them. However, that may be something they're looking forward to the future, you know, with carbon issues, that there may be more and more of those cars coming into play in the next 30 or 40 years that are, you know, need a charging station. So we're trying to look ahead.
Yeah, our low-income neighbors right next door to us have 2 gas electric cars. And the reason they got those is the county had a really cool program where you could trade in your, what did they call it? Your
Trade a wreck or something?
Trade your wreck or something like that, and then they gave you this car.
It's called Replace Your Ride.
Replace your ride, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Not trade your wreck.
Close. It's close.
Yeah. Anyway, they actually qualified for the program twice. So you never know, there may be folks that would get into a program like that. But in one development here in Pasadena, they've got places for electric cars, but they've made them shared vehicles so that anyone can use those. So, and they have a way that you can sign up, you know. So the sustainability, is there anything about that you want to share, Doug?
No, well, this is interesting. One of the things we have looked at is the construction of this particular project was, we start looking at financially stable, I think, was one of the things that we were, you know, environmentally friendly and also financially stable. That this wasn't going to be turning into some kind of, you know, the Jordan Downs project at some point in the future. We wanted it to be something that will fit into the community and be part of the community. And that slide that you showed earlier with the trolley stop on it, from the train station to downtown Santa Ana, this is stop number 2. So as you come from the train station, you're going through a residential area, and this will be probably the first aha moment you will have as you come down the street in the streetcar from the train station. And I think the city fathers were looking at it and kind of going, okay, yeah, this is going to be, you know, something that's going to be a real flash in the community. And if you look at number 5, I think this is one, item number 5 in the development objectives was key for us, because the first project we looked at, the one over in Garden Grove, the people who are working there, they have an embedded free clinic as well as a boys and girls club. And one of the things that they were adamant about was that this particular community anchor was not just for the residents of that particular project. They wanted to reach out beyond the perimeter into the community around there. So we're going to have a 2,700 square foot community center, which will be used for operations within the community as those opportunities present themselves. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
So it's kind of a gateway to Santa Ana in a sense. It's going to be one of the first stops that people see when they come into your city.
Right.
And then it's also it's really the church using this as a huge way to reach to the entire city as a way to, or at least that community as a way to participate in activities. So,
and we were adamant too that as part of the project that we would have an office there. There will be a church office in that building.
Mm-hmm.
Are you having
So,
church services in that building at any point? Are you anticipating church services in the building?
Again?
Are you anticipating ever having church services in the community room in the building?
That might be one of the things I've already talked to our director of youth activities, and one of the things we want to get our youth involved with in this particular project is to come alongside of the agencies that are already there to help. We don't want to have to reinvent the wheel, but we do want to be a presence there. And at certain times of the year, there might be opportunities for us to do Bible school or something along those lines, where we could actually take advantage of our embedded location right there. It may be a little dicey just because we've got government funding in it, but we'll have to see how that plays out as we go forward.
Doug, you might talk to your developer about that if that's one of your goals, because I think there's a certain firewall or something that could be put in place that then makes it possible for you to do Christian programming. I know that sounds really goofy, but it's a lot of people say you can't use government funds and have, faith-based programming, but you actually can, but it has to do with the design and how it's set up. So just double check on that.
Yeah.
Let me go. Any other questions from you guys at this point?
I kind of was hoping to hear Doug talk on the other part of my question about how he was able to, or how the church came to the conclusion that they are going to go and do affordable housing. Like, that's a real necessary conversation. For example, pastors approach me. I'm colleagues with pastors and ministers. That's what my community consists of. And they want to know, like, I care about this issue, but I can't get my church to follow on board. So how did that come about?
I'll go back to the demographics of our congregation first of all. With 5 congregations together and 4 of them being ethnic minorities, a lot of them are struggling with the issue of how to find a place to live in Orange County that they can afford. In fact, several of our members have said, am I eligible to get into this project once it's completed? And we said, you are eligible to apply, but the church is not going to be involved in the selection process at all. We want to remain neutral. We want to be Switzerland, if you will, in this particular process, so that there's no intention, if you will, of bias or favoritism towards members of our own congregation. The demographics of our congregation, like I said, we've got a lot of Filipinos who are involved in home health care, so their socioeconomics are tough. A lot of them have young families and the cost of housing. So it was almost a given that our demographics of our congregation dictated kind of where our heads were already before the decision came along. Where do we go with this? It was kind of part of our DNA, if you will.
So you didn't have any pushback from the wealthy or well-to-do members of your congregation?
There were a little bit of pushback, actually, from the ethnic congregations who were meeting down there. We had once our Tongan group had met down there for a long, long period of time, and there was also a Filipino group. So for them, it was a bit of a give up of their worship space, but it took a while. Fortunately, we have a Filipino pastor who was able to explain it to the Filipinos in the context of what would Jesus do, basically, in the context of having this gift in a community where you know people are needing it. And it took a little while to curve that arc, but within our ethnic congregations, those with wealth are few and far between. We're pretty much a lower middle class. There's a few older folks in our congregation, but they're dwindling, and the socioeconomics basically are where they are right now, making it so that this is like almost a no-brainer.
And I think it sounds like the Spirit of God just really was preparing your Board of Trustees. As soon as Sandy came through and shared this idea, it sounds like immediately you were all on the same page. I mean, that kind of unity. It makes me think of Acts chapter 2 and chapter 4, because the evidence of the Holy Spirit was really a willingness to share and sell property and have all things in common. And so when you see a church come together and to be willing to give up land and share all things in common and come to consensus around a common idea, I just think the only way that can happen is through God's Spirit uniting.
Well, and it was back in that upper room before the coming of the Holy Spirit, and they were together, and I think that was, there were still some ethnic and some cultural struggles that we had to hash out over the process of this evolution, but from the get-go, I think it was pretty obvious that this is what God is calling us to do with this particular property.
I wonder too, Doug, if having everything done in such a professional way, I mean, this is a beautiful PowerPoint. You had a real estate lawyer that helped you. You had excellent questions. I mean, all of this builds incredible credibility. I think that would really minimize any kind of pushback when they see the quality of the developer you chose. Don't you think all that probably played a role in creating a lot of acceptance on the part of the community?
I think, you have to earn it, and that's one of the things that we've struggled with, I think, in some of the town hall meetings, that the people who needed to hear, for whatever reason, chose not to show up to hear, and then they kind of felt blindsided a little bit later on as the decisions were made and the project continued to move forward. But I didn't have a voice in it. Well, you were offered a voice in it, but you chose not to. So, I can't help you at that particular point in time. The project was going to go forward with you or without you. Mm-hmm.
So there were some naysayers that they just chose not to.
Well, and that's the sad part about it is, I hate to say it, but there are some people say, well, I've got mine, why should I help somebody else out? And it's like, that really strikes me the wrong way. If you name the name of Christ as where your guiding principles come from. Mm-hmm. If you slide down to slide number 13, which is the compatible design slide, you kind of get to see how the whole piece fits into the existing community that it's embedded in.
Compatible design.
Slide number 13.
Well, this isn't giving us numbers, so I'm looking at the title. There it is, compatible design. There you go.
Yeah, compatible design.
So what were you going to say about this slide?
Well, this is actually how it fits into the existing community. What they did is they ran a drone up, flew the drone, took a snapshot, and then embedded the new structure right there in the foreground. And if you look into the background off to the left, there's a big tall building. That is the Ronald Reagan Federal Courthouse. And then out in the middle ground, there's also a tall white building. That is the Central Justice Center for the for the County of Orange. And in all of those buildings in the foreground, there are county offices, city offices, all kinds of, there's about 30,000 people who work in that particular quarter on a daily basis between the courts and the Civic Center buildings. So this is going to be right on a very busy thoroughfare of people coming and going in and out of the city.
Yeah. Some of your previous slides also spoke about some of the location. Let me see where. Mm-hmm. Transit-oriented design, site plan, project summary. early outreach. So this tells about all your steps to work with the different congregations. Ideal location. I'm kind of going backwards here, but I don't know what my question was going to be. But other questions you all have? Was the question about finances clarified for you, Mercy? Did that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's a, from what I understand, if a church or community has land and is it up to the church to pitch to developer or the developer pitches to them? I'm not sure, because I'm actually looking to actually have these conversations. So I'm just kind of wet behind the ears.
Yeah. I think it's all of
I
the
think
above.
pitch your vision to your developers and see who embraces it. I think would be the thing that I would be looking for. All three of our developers embraced it. Each of them had their own unique spin on it, and we was a matter of discernment then of who brought the most to the table that matched with those 14 questions that we asked as part of the RFP.
So if you notice what Doug just said, pitch your vision. And so the assumption is that the church already has a vision for this. And I think that's really where it has to start. They're going to feel very imposed upon if some developer knocks on the door and says, we want to use your land. It's really got to start with the church, with a vision. And too often churches think they need money. They do not. All they need is a vision and a willingness to open their hearts and explore. And the land, of course. But there is one part, you said that the ground was the only part that was the skin in your, in your church's vision for this, but you also paid for the real estate developer, which was a lot of money, but really worth his weight in gold.
But his fees were actually tucked into the contract. So his fees are actually, we managed to do due diligence in this and said, okay, we need this, but we don't have the juice to pay for it. So one of the things we worked into the contract is that his fees would be covered by the final contract. So it's all tucked in there. And if you look at the RFP, question number one, I think, kind of sets the table for what we wanted, is to describe your vision for the project, including an approximate number of units and parking spaces, any specifically targeted populations, proposed income targeting, and any special amenities. We wanted to see what they brought to the table in total that would give us, a good feel for what we were looking for and what they saw the site also translating into.
So those 14 questions are part of what make up the RFP, the request for proposal. So the church went to the point of crafting exactly what they wanted and what they were looking for within, and that's how they chose a developer. So that, what was I going to say? Something about that. I can't remember. So the developer looks and pulls together all the finances, but in terms of the finances, you all are also part of that because you showed up at the city council as a church when they were voting on whether they were going to give, what was the part of the city, 3.5 million or something that they gave?
It's part of SB 50. If you pull up that particular document from the state of California, it's called a density bonus or something along those lines. I don't have the document in front of me, but it basically requires the cities to, where there are projects like this on the table, that they have to be a partner in it as well. They also have to have some stake in the game, if you will, to make affordable housing possible for cities here in California.
I need to bet, because I don't think it's SB 50. That's a different policy. It is SB 50? Okay.
SB 50 was just passed last year.
Okay. Well, I know AB 1818, the density bonus law, also is probably applied in this case for you to max out your density, but that doesn't come with any financial part. So the city had participated financially. The developer is coming up with all the funding sources. Then the residents will bring their own funding sources depending on their needs
Yeah.
and what that
Yeah.
qualifies them for.
Yeah. In the PowerPoint, in the back of the document section, after you get to questions, there is an affordability limit chart in there. Basically, extremely low income, 0 to 30% AMI. So all of our rents are predicated on AMI, verifiable AMI. And so from there, then you start looking at how much the rents are, which are going to be predicated on what you bring to the table in the way of a paycheck, and no more than 30%.
Yeah. So everybody participates in the finances except the church.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, we crap. This is one of the reasons we did get the real estate lawyer,
Yeah.
the real estate attorney, because they know the ins and outs, and we wanted the project to go forward, but we wanted to minimize our exposure.
Any other questions? We've got just a few minutes left. I sent you this PowerPoint. You all should have it. I sent it to you a couple days ago.
Yeah. I think in the PowerPoint that I sent you, Jill, that it may have the market rate housing still in it. And,
I think
that was
yeah.
Yeah. See, and that's an interesting thing too, because you might want to explain to the folks that when we had our sunshine meeting with the local community, which we are mandated by law to do, there were representatives from the city there, and they had actually mandated that 10% of our units be market rate. And they got an earful from the community and basically backed off on that. And now the project is 100% affordable. And I think this is a classic example of Santa Ana, at least, is being sensitive to where the community is and are making some wise choices as to, how these projects are shaped ultimately for the benefit of the local community. A couple blocks south of us is a site where is a supermarket currently, and the owner of that particular property wanted to take it down and put market rate housing in there, and the local community was up in arms. They basically were livid that anybody would even consider doing that in this particular community based on the income and the demographics. So it works.
Yeah, it's great. Tommy, Roston, any questions, Mercy, before we close out this portion of our class?
So Doug, basically, I think you said the land value was 4.7, which would be 10% of the overall $47 million project. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, sir. Yeah, we part of the arrangement that we did with this is we hired an outside appraiser to come in and appraise it as is. And obviously, with a project like this, we had the developer also did the environmental impact report and looked for any contamination and things like that might impact the project going forward. So there was a lot of legwork up front to get to this particular point, and that was part of our development agreement that we hammered out with the developer. And just going forward, you have to have all the pieces in front of you so you know what you've got. What kind of cards are you actually holding going into a project of this size?
So your question, yeah.
So the developer really kind of has to assess the likelihood of a project like this. He has to look at you and see that first that you and your church are in agreement, and then moving forward, he has to look at his risk to see if it's a viable project for him, because he's going to make his money on the way down the line, not from any fees.
And that's one of the things we've told our members of our congregation as well, that yes, there will be some revenue generated from this from a ground lease perspective, but we did not go into this as a money generator. That's secondary to the ability to provide homes for somebody who has none at this point in time or who can't afford one.
Tommy, you're raising a good question, and it's a really important question, and it would be answered very differently from a market rate developer as opposed to affordable housing developer. And so your question is, where does the income source come from for the developer? And so that might be a real good question for us to explore when we get more details into the development process. Today, we're focusing more on homelessness, and that's why I wanted Doug to share with us, because their church directly responding to that need and using land they have. But typically for a developer, they get their income from their developer fee, and that they're able to assess through each project. But I think they also need to think long term and what are the other ongoing income for them. So I like your question. I think we need to really zero in on that in a later class. So,
Jill, if I might, one thing you might want to look into too is there is a bill that was passed, House Resolution 828 at the federal level, that is opportunity zones. And opportunity zones play very big into this as well, because if you've got a fund that will help, move new housing and stuff into an area like this, if you put money into that for a 5-year period and then decide to take out your capital gains after 5 years, you only have to pay on 90% of it, as opposed to the whole capital gains. If you keep it in there for 7 years, you gain an extra 5%, so you only have to pay taxes on 85%. However, if you keep your investment in there for a full 10 years, any capital gains that you get beyond that are tax-free. So you may want to do a little background research on opportunity zones. There's some outrageous maps in Google for opportunity zones throughout the United States, and most of them are in low-income, depressed centers of communities and cities.
that's really helpful, Doug. Thank you. Any other questions before we move on?
Yeah, Doug. So you were saying that when you were talking about the skin in the game that your church has is just the lands and the value of the land, and you were saying that's all the church really needs to bring. I'm in Abilene, Texas, where in West Texas if we've got anything, we've got land, and so land values aren't all that high. So if a church is just sitting on a parcel of land, it's more likely to be worth $20,000 than it is to be worth $4.7 million. So in that scenario, is it more likely the church would have to bring more to the table than just the land?
Yeah, and you might look at it from a long term, because we went into this with a ground lease aspect. You might be able to negotiate with that and tailor it so that you're making maybe less on your ground lease returns, as opposed to an area where property is at a premium. You can tailor it. This is one of the reasons I think that having a real estate attorney involved in it is talk about what are my options, and they will know more about the ups and downs of a transaction like this, from a cost benefit work for the property owner. Is this worth a deal going forward? And if so, how are you going to shape it so that there's places for people to live, and also something that will last for a time and be of benefit to the property owner. It's a dicey, obviously, from Southern California, where land is expensive, to the Great Plains of the Midwest, and there's lots of land out there, but it doesn't have the value that it does here. If you could pick it up and move it here, I could make you a bundle.
Yeah. Yeah. Good question, Rostin. Well, thank you so much, Doug, for your time, and I just thank you so much for what you're doing. I know you had to move one appointment in order to spend this time with us today, so thank you for your flexibility. And I just hope that there'll be many opportunities for you to share this story, because I think there's a lot of churches that are wanting to do this, but they have no idea where to get started. So we may just be calling on you again. Mercy,
Okay.
it sounds like she's got some folks too that she's been talking to. So,
right.
so we really can't thank you enough. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Okay, you know, and if there's the questions that come up later, forward them to me, and I'll try and get back to you as soon as I can. You know, and like I said, we were really blessed with having Sandy get us started on this. And I last time I saw her, I said, you know, you will be at the groundbreaking, and she smiled at me and said yes. So we're going to drag everybody who's been a part of this equation down there with a shovel and have them turn some dirt as we get ready to get this underway. So. Keep praying for us. We've got a long way to go yet, but I think the Lord has been very faithful in our march so far. So
we'll make sure I'm on that list for the groundbreaking list. I want to go too. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
So let's go to the next slide in this slideshow. Okay. Oh, wasn't that great, you guys? Can you all hear me?
Absolutely. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Just a real quick note. I've been back and forth with Roston on this. My Apple products, I can't see any of the word, and maybe Roston, you can address that with me, or how to deal with that. I was wondering why I didn't have the 14 questions, and I'm pretty illiterate when it comes to computer stuff.
Oh. So I attached it by email a few days ago, and it didn't come through.
Well, it came through to him, but it's an attachment as a Word document, and since he uses an iPad, he doesn't have Word. He probably has Pages.
Oh.
I mean, honestly, for the Word doc, it might just be best to like find a friend who has a PC instead of an Apple product, and just get them to print it off for you.
We can also send you a PDF file.
Yeah, we can make it into a PDF and send it that way. Can you open a PDF, Tommy?
I think so.
Yeah, you'll be able to have a PDF viewer.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
And that could be done with a slideshow as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot of root causes for homelessness, and I think we didn't get to some of those. Let me go back and see where we are here, where we left off. So I think it was here. We talked about the definition of chronic homelessness, and then basically how many are homeless. And so it's interesting. There's a comparison here. In our book, he gave the statistics from 2005, and it's really not that much different. You can see the number there compared to 2018. And so what Roston was saying, that, you know, we aren't making that much progress, but what in reality, we're getting a lot of people housed, but there's so many people falling into homelessness that we're not making that much progress. So it feels like we're not doing much. And so I think it's important that we look at homeless prevention, and that's also one of the national best practices. How do you keep people in their homes? And so we have a church here in town, Lake Avenue, that's a large congregation, about 5,000 members. And so what they've done is they've created a homeless prevention program, and they've spent about $90,000 in the last year to help people stay in their homes. They might be short rent just 1 month, or have some reason, you know, and they'll help cover that. And so, they've done a stellar job of looking at homeless prevention. How many of you guys are familiar with St. Vincent de Paul, with the Catholic Charities? Yeah, Catholic. Yeah, so St. Vincent de Paul, they really understand homeless prevention. And if you want to partner with them to try to learn what they do to keep people in their homes, it's really beautiful. It's a whole lot cheaper to keep someone in their home than to help them once they become homeless. So we talked about different counts. I'd like some feedback from you guys on what you came up with in your communities on the counts. Who would like to start? Are we all on? I can only see Roston. I can't see Tommy or Mercy, but I'm assuming you're both there.
I'm here, Jill. As I mentioned before we started, I'm kind of, at this moment, I'm on my way to, I'm going to be leaving my house. So I'm going to be still connected, but I'm actually going to have to do it through my phone. So
Okay.
I'll do that in a minute. And
Okay.
so you might have to reconnect me.
Okay. So can you tell us, do you have time to share what your findings are? Did you get a chance to look at what the homeless count is?
Yeah, so I took up your suggestion to do Altadena. Altadena is not a city per se, so it was actually not as confusing as I thought it would be. And let me pull up that information. 1 second. I'm actually not, I don't have it in front of me. It's going to take me a second to pull that document up. If someone else wants to go, that's fine.
Tommy, did you get a chance to look at what the homeless count is in your target area?
Not in the target area. It's just so rural that the information is not as readily available as Colorado Springs. You know,
Yeah.
I've talked to you about the city of Divide, and they're, you know, a one stoplight town.
Yeah.
So that's not much on their radar at this point.
We talked about
probably
the
gonna-
county, though, the county that little town is in, and doing the homeless count for that county. Because I'm sure that they've done some kind of work on that. So if you're going to target that town, it will be a little more challenging probably, but you could just, for some of these assignments, switch to Colorado Springs just to get to know your own community. So it's up to you, whichever direction you want to go. But did you get a chance to look at Colorado Springs, but or probably didn't occur to you to switch at that point?
No.
Okay. Maybe you can get some of that for our next class and share with us, or maybe, you know, between now and then. How about you, Roston? What's your count?
Tommy, just a quick note. Colorado Springs probably has a homeless coalition. And so tracking down the homeless coalition will probably be the easiest way to find y'all's pit count.
Yeah.
So we've completed our pit count for the 2019 year. We don't have our final results in. Actually, someone in my office was the count lead this year. And so she's kind of, she was very stressed for about a week and a half leading up to the count because it's a big undertaking. Our 2018 pit count we had 137 folks unsheltered and 110 folks that were sheltered. And so that was a total of 247 that were considered literally homeless according to our pit count in 2018. And that sounds pretty reasonable from what I've experienced. We have the unsheltered would include the emergency shelter at Hope Haven where I work, which has a max of 25 people. And then our Salvation Army, which I think is a max of in the 40 range. And then our domestic violence shelter, which is a max of, depending on who you ask, anywhere from 80 to 95 or 80 to 96.
Now, did you compare that to the school district count?
I kind of avoid the school district count because they get a little annoying with it. They'll show up at our events and we'll say, yeah, 247 was our pit count last year. And they'll say, oh, well, we've got 1,500 youth on the streets. It's like, no, you don't. 95% of those youth are like couch surfing or they're with friends, which isn't good, but it's like they're making it sound like it's the exact same thing, and it's not. The last time I heard it was over 1,000 was what the school district is counting in terms of the McKinney-Vento regulations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the methodologies are pretty diverse between school districts and the official city counts because they do count couch surfing.
Can
Anything?
I ask,
Yeah.
Roston, do they do that because of funding? Do they inflate numbers because this to their benefit and funding?
Well, it's not inflated numbers. It's just a different definition. And so the McKinney-Vento definition for youth homelessness includes couch surfing or doubling up with friends and family. And so it's real numbers. It's just they try to it's comparing apples and oranges whenever you're in the same room talking together.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And in terms of methodology, I mean it's anywhere from like for the pit count, there's an app that's called Counting Us, I think is what it's called. Counting Us, yeah. And it's really cool app, but it's here, I can just show it to you. But and so that app is used both for the shelter counts. Here it is for the Texas Balance of State Continuum of Care. So it's the same whether it's for a shelter or if it's on the streets. And so like I was part of the outreach team for the pit count. And so I was actually going, me and a couple of other folks were kind of tasked with like kind of trying to track down people that had not left tent camps already for the day. And it was kind of like we were kind of the Hail Mary team because most of the people who, if you're going to find someone at a tent camp, it's going to be either first thing in the morning or last thing at night. And at that point, you don't really want to go because you're disrupting people when they're either sleeping or getting ready to sleep or something along those lines. And that's just kind of not a positive thing to do.
So it's interesting because we've had a lot of controversies over counts here in Pasadena, and me and Anthony have been part of those counts almost every year. But one year it was a really big change, and it's partly because they changed their methodologies. So you mentioned counting late at night, and in our city we're saying that's really the only time you can find people. You need to go late at night. We don't worry about bothering people. In fact, people are like, oh, you guys are here again. This is great, and they even know why we're doing it. They understand that if they're well counted, it'll create more funding for housing. And so there's been a whole culture in our community of people so grateful in a way that we're coming and counting them. But also we do it again in the morning first thing. And some people say that because I think it's from 8 to 10 at night.
Yeah.
And then the next morning from 6 to 8 in the morning. And some people say that's actually too late. If they go even earlier, they'd probably get a better count. So just because of a simple change of an hour or two at the timing that you do it, you're going to end up with a different count. So the questions as well. So we've added some questions. We're wanting to know who are local, who are the folks that consider Pasadena their home. They're not coming from another community. That's one of our big complaints. A lot of people say, oh, they're all coming in on the Gold Line and they live in LA. Well, in reality, we're finding that's actually not the case because we've now added this question to find out. And the majority of them are from this area. They were born and raised here. So I think there's a team that helps kind of tweak those questions, and then you have to work with the federal government to get those questions approved. There's quite a process, but we mostly have Fuller Seminary that's been the ones that have been leading the whole homeless count, and so a lot of students are involved in this. We've had over 100 people that have come out that participate in the counts every year from a lot of the churches. It's a real significant way people can get involved in. A lot of our elected officials also are involved. It's kind of the end thing, that there's a pride factor if people on the city council have participated in the count. So I know that, Roston, that's a very different paradigm than your community. What is it that you said about the count?
Well, We have a there's a good chance we're about to have a pretty good shift in our council towards a couple of younger seats that are going to be more interested in this kind of stuff. Probably because one of our kind of nutsier members is just like, he's basically he's leaving and his seat's up for re-election, but he hasn't even been to a council meeting since November. Like, he's just basically vacated the council without having actually retired from the council, which is really frustrating because we could put someone in his seat if he would actually say, I'm resigning, but he refuses to.
Yeah.
And then we've got another member who like has posted some incredibly racist stuff on Facebook that is up for re-election, and he's got like 5 other people running against him. So we might have some changes, but yeah, I would love to get that. I think there's possibilities there. It's just it's an uphill battle at this point.
Yeah. Well, I got up on the screen. I hope you all can see this. This is a great tool. So it tells you the homeless counts in each state. This is from the National Low Income Housing Coalition. Oh no, this is the it's a different site than that. I think it's with the
National Alliance for Ending
National
Homelessness.
Alliance, yeah, to end homelessness. So you can see right here in Texas, the percentage of people per 10,000 and the total count. Now, whether this is accurate or not, it's hard to say. Would you say that's probably pretty accurate? 23,548 homeless in your state?
Sure. I would imagine that probably as much as 20,000, that would be in the urban centers, and then the rest would be the balance of state, but that's just a guess.
Okay. And then if you go up here to Colorado, there's Wyoming. Where's Colorado? Right there. Okay, got it. So Roston, you can see here for your state.
Wow.
And so it's this is just for presentations and getting an idea. This is a great site to have. Now we'll look here in California, and it's huge. So
just looking at the comparison between not just, I mean, the gross numbers is important, but the percentage of people homelessness in 10,000 is, I mean, we went from, I think it was less than 10 in Texas to almost 20 in Colorado to almost 35 in California.
Yeah. And so what's interesting is that, Roston, when you say it's hard to get your homeless count, kinds of tools will help you. But I think there's probably a lot more rural homelessness than we realize. They're very hidden, and but it's worth the effort to learn and to really get to know your target area if that's where you're going to focus. So let's go back to the PowerPoint, and
Jill, can you hear me?
Hey.
yeah, did you find it?
Yeah, I have my document, and I'm going to just kind of present the information because I can't look at the same time as I'm looking at you guys. So I'm going to flip back and forth, and then I'm going to disconnect and call you from my phone. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Thank you for bearing with me. So let me flip over. Okay, so in the city, the community of Altadena, there is a total number for 2018, a total number of 56 homeless people. 31 of those are unsheltered, 25 are sheltered. And so that's about a 54%, 45% difference. And then the methodology for the count, I really love how this was presented on the website. They have 4 different approaches. One is a demographic survey, a survey-based collection of all demographic information of those experiencing homelessness. The second one is shelter or institutional count. account of everyone experiencing homelessness found in shelters, transitional housing, hospitals, and correctional facilities. The third one is a youth count, a survey-based count on unaccompanied and unsheltered youth and young families under the age of 24. And lastly, the street count, pretty much where it says a visual-only tally of everyone without shelter. And my guess is they're not talking to these people. They're just looking and guessing visually who is homeless, which I would love to know how they do that.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so Mercy's bringing up a really important point. So you all were here in Pasadena in January, and I'm not sure we crossed the border into Altadena, but it's just right next to Pasadena. It's just a street that divides us. But it's a world of different because Altadena is not its own city, it's part of the county, and they don't have the strong infrastructure that Pasadena does on doing a homeless count. We had 100 people, as I mentioned, so we were able to cover by walking and flashlights and clipboards every corner of our city. Whereas in Altadena, they don't have that kind of, county-wide infrastructure. And so I encourage you to find out, Mercy, how they visually look at someone and somehow know that they're homeless. So thanks for that report.
I'm sure some days I probably look the part too.
Yeah, she looks homeless. She must be one. So let me go to the next slide. And so again, you already kind of helped us do a snapshot, Mercy, of the breakdown. And these are often the questions that we come up with. It's very important that we know if someone's family or veterans or female, because there's different pots of money for these different populations to help get them housed. So there's been a lot of money in recent years for veteran homelessness. So if we can identify who the veterans are, we'll be able to target them and be able to get them housed much more quickly. So as you look at the counts when they outline their ethnicities and racial makeup, by far the biggest group of homeless are those that are African American. So I'm just curious what you guys think about this in terms of why is it that such a high percentage, even though 13% of those of African Americans are in our population, yet 40% are in our homeless count.
I mean, I just go back to the unequal use of legislation in our nation's history against African Americans, from the Homesteading Act, the GI Bill, all the way to redlining, etc. It's just the generational wealth has just been continually stripped in the African American community, and it's we're seeing the fruits of that. Yeah.
All the things we talked about in the unjust housing policy game, and some of the things you've read in my book. You read the chapter on the housing crisis and the history of that, what's caused it. So let's look at the next slide and admit someone got kicked off. Are we all on now? Mercy, are you there?
Mercy went to phone. She was asking you.
Yeah, okay.
She'll be back.
Okay.
And something will pop up and say, admit her, and then we will.
Okay.
I'm right here.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
So there's some things that I talked about in the book and that I really appreciated our author kind of pointing out. So the rise of Section 8. So this is really significant because if you understand Section 8, it's a good policy, but it doesn't produce any new housing. It's taking existing housing and then helping landlords make up the difference in the rent for someone who's lower income. And so in the 70s, we were building tons of affordable housing. We actually had a surplus. But then we switched to Section 8, and we started beginning to see deficits of housing. Then the loss of SROs, so single room occupancy, many of those have not been built in years. Maybe in your communities they have, but not in California. I went to the city council a few weeks ago. It was the first SRO I've seen on our first SRO that I've seen, you know, on our agenda for years. So I wanted to kind of learn what the city's thinking about that. And it's not even going to be affordable. So, and they're going to do it more for students close to a Pasadena City College. But SROs, flop houses, all these different models that were not decent housing, but it was housing, were in our city centers across our country. But when you look at redevelopment, so many states have redevelopment laws where you can, through tax increment financing, you can improve those city centers, those main streets around the country. And so by getting funding, infusing funding into these main streets, it gets people to flock to the main streets, because now it's these quaint old buildings that are being refurbished, and what that does is completely displace those SROs and those flop houses. So that was very much a trend. So I just wanted to ask if you guys can see how those trends have played out in your own communities. Honey, we're off the internet somehow. We got disconnected.
Oh, I still hear you.
We
you're
see you.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
you're still here.
Okay. So have you seen this trend also in your own cities, where the loss of SROs and Section 8 without the production of new housing units has...
I honestly don't know. I mean, I've only been here for 10 years, and I haven't really looked at the history of this in Abilene. But I mean, I will say that I know, you know, so we don't have what would be considered, you know, what would have been an SRO now. I mean, we got, you know, dirt cheap motels that get treated in that way, but they still cost well more, you know, because it's a daily occupancy rate. It's closer to a motel cost. It costs way more than renting a similar unit would cost. You know, you get a dirt cheap 1-bedroom in Abilene for $150, where you get your bedroom, living room, kitchen, whereas, you know, just one of those really, you know, cheap, nasty motel rooms, it would cost $900 a month because you're paying it at a daily rate.
Yeah. Well, I know in Old Town Pasadena, it was really when I first moved here in 91, it had a lot of those places, you know, flop house type places. And when it started to infuse all this, you know, money into refurbishing Old Town, none of that's left at all. It's completely high end now, which is sad. You know, that we had our inclusionary policy that required any new buildings have a percentage of housing that's affordable, but it's certainly not affordable to people that are homeless. And that first year that we passed the inclusionary policy, it was only 6% of the buildings should be affordable. And then the second year it picked up to 15%. So everybody put in their permits that first year. So they would only do 6%. And so we really have emptied out a lot of the affordability in our Old Town area. But I doubt that the little city of Divide even has an Old Town. It's just tiny. So you might want to look at Colorado Springs. Tommy, are you there?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. For some of these assignments, you're probably the learning's gonna be a lot higher if you kind of focus on Colorado Springs on some of these questions. But so present day homelessness continued. So economic conditions, the purchase power, and this is what our Alan Malik mentioned, is changed dramatically. So even in what you can get with minimum wage, it's huge, the difference. You could buy a lot more with the minimum wage in 1960 compared to now. When it talked about the assistance to family with dependent children, it lost 53% of its worth from 68 to 85. And so So those programs have been tremendously diminished, but just the value of the dollars, when you look at the inflation over the years, it's changed dramatically. Then the deinstitutionalization of the mentally ill, which we mentioned, and Anthony brought that to bear. And then the increase in drugs in the crack epidemic. There's a movie that talks about that called Kill the Messenger. Have you guys, by any chance, seen that movie? Fascinating movie, all
Nope, I
about.
can look it up.
Yeah, I might encourage you guys to consider looking at it. It's all about how Reagan was able to get the funding for his war that he wanted to cause by drug running in Central America. And, you know, typically we just hear all these great things about our presidents, but when you start digging deeper, you find some ugly things at times. And then it shows how that affected the inner cities across our nation when they just infused all this crack. So the decrease in family support, there's been a lot of shifts in terms of what family means today. And so that's something that some churches are addressing. So Hollywood Presbyterian Church, they have what's called the Lord's Lighthouse, and one of their main homeless outreach ways of helping people get housed is to reunify families. They spend quite a bit of time helping to find who the relatives are and if there's any interest in, you know, in re-engaging again. And they've had some pretty good success with that. So, so why are people homeless today? Again, there's the cost of housing is the #1 cause. There just isn't enough income and not enough, and that the housing prices have skyrocketed. So the income and housing affordability is huge. And then connecting homeless, well, these are homelessness and health, escaping violence, and impact of racial disparities. So you'll probably find a lot of folks because of health concerns. Just this week, I learned about a homeless family with a 5-month-old baby living in their car that he had some health problems, and they didn't have a way to pay for it, and now they're in their car. So escaping violence. So domestic violence is often a cause of homelessness. And then, as I mentioned, the racial disparities in the history of housing policies that have affected especially African Americans. So I wanted to look this up, but I'm going to have you guys look that up later. I want to make sure we get to some of our final slides. I might skip some of these. I mean, this class really is recognizing that the solution to homelessness is housing, and that wasn't always the case. Many cities and many churches, they just focused on serving the homeless, you know, making shelters, but not thinking in terms of long-term permanent housing. And so, so there's a huge need in our country. 7.3 or 0.2 million homes are needed at that very low income level to be able to address the concerns in our country. But rather than looking at the negativity of what we can't, you know, how far we have to go, there's really a lot of success that we can build on. And a lot of that comes from the Housing First model. So I'm going to kind of see if we're ready for a little quiz here. Whoops. What did I do?
Go back.
Okay. So the homeless rate has gone down in the last decade. If so, why? True or false? What do you guys think?
I can imagine that being true. I don't know for sure. I haven't seen the data, so.
Is that true, huh? It's true. Okay. Is there currently a shortage of 720,000 rental units?
I'm sorry, Jill, could I ask you why that's happened? The first question, if that's
Can you
true.
hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Hey, sorry, I wasn't sure how my phone is doing. I didn't hear the question. Sorry.
Okay, the homeless rate has gone down in the last decade. Is that true or false? And it's true. And Tommy wanted to know why. And that's a really big question, Tommy. And I think because of people like Roston and the whole huge infrastructure that's now in place to address homelessness, we're going to briefly look at a few of those big national departments and the COC. There's a whole infrastructure that's helped to address this that wasn't in place a few years ago. So is there currently a shortage? The answer on the of affordable units, the answer is actually false on the second one.
It's way higher, right?
Yeah, it's
10
like
times higher.
it's 10 times
Like
higher than
that, yeah.
720,000. Yeah,
7.2 million.
yeah. And then name 3 causes of homelessness. Can you guys off the top of your head give us 3?
Yeah, I'd say so. Health issues that lead to homelessness, affordability, and then race,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
and I'm trying to remember 2 others. There was
Domestic-
5 that you gave us, but
Yeah,
that's 3 of
domestic
them.
violence. Yeah.
Domestic
then-
yeah, skipping violence.
And what's one of the best practices for ending homelessness? Just name any of them. One of them we mentioned was homeless prevention.
Mm-hmm.
Keep people out of getting homeless, and then we're going to talk right now about housing, and the importance of that. So let's go to the next slide.
Housing first.
Housing first.
Exactly.
Somehow I don't know what's happened. Oh, I know. Let's skip over here. Our speaker came in early. So some of the national groups that, birth and housing first. I'm not going to go into this too much because it's pretty clear in your book, some of the birth of the housing first. And so, but the tenets are homeless prevention, coordinated entry system, which is what Roston's part of. That's really important. And that's really helped to increase getting people into homes by coordinating the whole city around those that are homeless and how to best serve them. Rapid rehousing, you want to get people housed quickly as possible back into housing. And then permanent, not time limited housing. And so supportive services to be availed without requirement that they access those, they're just there. So the people that are driving, whether they have those services, are the person themselves. They set their own goals and what they need. And then housing is not contingent on compliance with services. So, so these are some of the national best practices that happened onto back when they were first looking at housing first, and they're still true today. And this is the guy that was part of that. I think Roston, your face is superimposed on top of his picture, so maybe you guys can see it. I'm not sure, but it shows why this was so successful, as opposed to looking at all the funding that goes into shelters and transitional. So that's the big shift nationally toward housing first. It's really hard to get churches to understand this. Churches always want to do transitional and shelters. And there's a need for that, but it's not always the most efficient financially or the most beneficial in trying to end homelessness. So solutions to ending homelessness. Again, these are some of the national federal policies and agencies that I think the biggest thing about opening doors, the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness, is that they're setting goals. So sometimes if we don't set a goal, we never reach it, and it's really important that they have set some really clear goals in cities around the country of ending homelessness, for example, for veterans by a certain time frame, ending homelessness for women by a certain time frame. And so that way, when you reach those goals, you can celebrate your wins. And so by creating this whole infrastructure and support around specific goals and reaching them, that's a lot of what Opening Doors does. I really encourage you to look at these links and websites on your own. I'm going to skip through some of these, and I want to get to some of these core ideas I thought were really, I think this is the one. Here it is. I love this slide. So there's core values that are part of this HUD Department on Ending Homelessness. So the core value that homelessness is unacceptable, that there are no homeless people, but rather those who have lost their homes, who deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. Homelessness is expensive. It is better to invest in solutions. And that sounds so counterintuitive, but they've tested over and over again. To keep someone on the street is more expensive than getting them housed because of all the services they tap into, going into hospitals, toxic, what am I trying to say, detox centers and so forth, police calls. Homelessness is solvable. We have learned a lot about what works, and we do know what works, and it's homes. I encourage you to look at the link for the John what's it called? Jon Stewart, when he talks about Utah. How many of you seen that link before? Yeah, it's just a great little video. They've kind of bottomed out. It was at 72. They've addressed 72% of their homeless folks have now been housed, but those others, it's actually starting to increase in that state, and it's a lot because they don't have the funding. So they're going to have to start looking at funding sources. So there's the belief that homelessness can be prevented, and there's strength in collaboration. And so that's the whole infrastructure around the COCs, the continuum of care, and all the community engagement required, and how come I'm not able to say it right now, the coordinated entry systems. So again, it's collaborative, solutions-driven, evidence-based, cost-effective, implementable, and user-friendly systems. There's that HTMI. Do you use that, Roston, the HTMI? Is it HTMI? What's it called? The
HMIS?
Yeah, HMIS.
Yeah, HDMI is a cable for your.
I know, I got
computer.
the wrong term. I'm not good with initials. Thank you.
Well, and I will also add to this, so just kind of boots on the ground perspective on this, like the official announcement is until this Thursday, but as of November, Abilene has ended veteran homelessness.
Yay! That's
so it's working.
Awesome. That is working. So these systems are working. Yeah.
And we're ramping up. So I think we're still another year out at least, but the next goal is to end chronic homelessness, and I don't see us being that far off.
Wow. This is so exciting. Thank you for sharing that great news. So these are some of the other systems in place. The consolidated plans, you can find these in all your cities that have homelessness. They have a consolidated plan that will look at this. Annual action plans, affirmatively furthering fair housing. So consolidated plans and annual action plans also have to do with general low-income people in your community and trying to address their concerns for housing. So we've got just 10 minutes, and I want to get on to our next class to make sure we're prepared. So that will be March 23rd, and the same 3 hours. Make sure we're able to sit at our computers ready to go. And then the readings, are looking at mostly chapters in my book that focus on housing that's built from the ground up. not necessarily preservation of existing housing, but starting new units. And so that's why I want you to start thinking about these models in your own community and maybe where you can see them, if you have them, or any kind of housing models in your own community. Then we'll be looking at Malik, chapter 7 and 8. I want you to start thinking about what some of the faith communities are doing in your towns to address homelessness. It'll be interesting, Mercy, in Altadena to see if there's a group that's interested in this in Altadena. I'd love to know who they are. It'd be awesome. And I don't know how you're going to do that, Roston, if you're going to focus on Divide. Again, you might want to switch to Colorado Springs for this.
The guy that you mentioned, Steve Lambs, I spoke with him, and he seems to be very knowledgeable. So I plan to really just connect with him and go forward.
Yeah, he's quite a character. So, yeah. Okay, so as far as symbols, I want you to start imagining how your city defines itself. Every city has its own flavor and its own kind of ethos, or if you will, a theology. And the Bible even speaks to different cities and kind of where they're coming from theologically. The city of Philadelphia, the city of love. I mean, cities are mentioned throughout Scripture, and they're all kind of given a description of what they're about. And so we want to try to get at that with the communities we're working in. And then I mentioned about looking at models of new units. And it may be you're in a city where they haven't built any new housing for years because the city flat refuses. You know, in a city like San Marino, that's a wealthy city just south of Pasadena. If anyone proposed a brand new housing unit, they might fight it like crazy. I don't know. But so then you need to attend a city council meeting in your community. And we'll look at that in just a minute. And then I guess I put the same question twice about faith communities. So integration project. So when we come together in Atlanta, which I've sent you all the information now about where the conference will be, and it's very exciting because we know a lot of people in Atlanta. I don't think we'll have any problem finding housing at a local church. So we can forego the expense of the hotel and just probably rent a car or a van for all of us to come and go to the conference every day. But at some point during that time, we'll probably go a day early or a day late, and you'll do your presentations to each other on all this information that you're gathering in this course. And in terms of trying to find out what the faith community is doing in your city, I think, Roston, you had a really good idea for Tommy to look at that if there's a homeless coalition. And so there's ways of finding out this information. I'm going to give you one example here of a college town in the College of Amherst. So these are some of the symbols in this town. And I'm going to have Anthony kind of explain this. It's kind of interesting. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, I went to college at Boston University. Amherst is always associated in my mind with a prestigious college. You know, I knew nothing about the origin of the name Amherst, and it turns out he's a Revolutionary War general. Now, the perspective of the indigenous native people is very different, because General Amherst is famous for giving smallpox-infected blankets to the Indians because he wanted to, I think he used the word, extirpate the savages. So he was a genocidal general, and he's now associated with this college. So different groups have very different perspectives.
So you guys might discover some different statues or symbols in your community that are really important. It might even be, like in Altadena, it might be the coffee shop that everyone hangs out with. You know, there's a coffee shop where everybody tends to go in Altadena called Coffee Gallery. And all kinds of up and coming things happen there. And so it might be a location that kind of defines that community, and everybody knows that city by that community. So, so just start thinking in terms of the theology and the history of your community. Try to get at some of those things
From different perspectives.
not just from the perspective of the majority, but
Can I give one example real quick? We were trying to get motels converted to homeless housing in East Pasadena. And one of the opponents they were always talking about preservation, historical preservation, and maybe some of these motels were, were historical. And the African-American city council member reminded us that many of these hotels weren't available to African-Americans in the 1950s.
yeah.
There was something called the Green Book, and that defined the motels that were available. And most of those motels in East Pasadena would not have accepted blacks.
And now those same hotels are not wanting homeless.
Yes.
So, so there's all different models. You might look at if there's a mixed use and a type of housing model in your community. There might be a bungalow court. There might be high rise. Especially in the city of Divide, wouldn't you say, Tommy? Don't you think there's a few high rises out there?
High
and then
rise would be a 2-story.
Yeah, right. And then it may just be these low, single family homes, and that's it, a total bedroom community. So. And then think about these housing types and what does that say about your community? What's the theology of diversity, of hospitality, of community? What does a single family community home say about community? Is there a place for them to connect or hang out? Or are they all just in their own individual homes most of the time? So there's this graph that I want you to start thinking about in terms of how to evaluate these different housing models that you find in your community. So if you look down at mixed use, mixed income, on model number 5, and you go across the local context. So we heard Doug talk today about this. And so the local context he provided is Santa Ana, and it's a very low income community. Who initiated it? In this case, it was the church that initiated this housing development. The role of the faith community in this case was huge. Okay, what created the affordability? It's their partners. So they partner with a developer, the city, all the funding that helped create the housing that's affordable. How is it sustained? The developer, they wanted to find in those 14 questions a developer that would be committed to the long haul and would take care of all the rents, the income, maintain the supportive services and so forth. So public and private transformation, is this involved in what we saw today? Absolutely. They're going to be transforming that whole community by what they're doing with their land. And so it's both public and private. So you can just kind of use this as a quick and dirty way to help you evaluate some of these models. So when you attend a city council meeting, just pay attention. What's being addressed? How was the discussion framed? Were there people there for or against the issue? And or if there was nobody, I mean, how did that make you feel? These important decisions and no one's even weighing in on it. Was there any discussion about housing or homelessness? And did any of the council people make you feel like, wow, I'd kind of like to get to know that person better. I like that person. So these are some things that you might consider when you write up your report on attending a city council meeting. And then this is my last slide, and it's in my book. I wanted you to read chapter 15. I'm not going to take a lot of time because we're really out of our time right now, but what this is, it's really a graph for social change and how we create social change. And if you look at the very bottom across here, the examples. So the bad weather shelter is a social service model. And that's kind of, it's important. Cities need to have that. And that we're not saying that one of these models are any better than another, but things have shifted away from shelters toward housing first. But there's still a need for things like bad weather shelter. We don't want to see homeless people dying of hypothermia on our streets like they did in Pasadena a few years ago before we had a bad weather shelter. Then mobilizing, convening. So there's conferences, there's all kinds of ways to educate ourselves, bring people together around issues. Community development is another model. And so when you look at what we learned today from Doug, his model is clearly going to be doing, it's definitely a model of community development because there's so many pieces coming together. They're going to improve that entire community. Advocacy. So in that chapter, we talked about Charles Suheda, who was the pastor at the Hollywood Presbyterian Church, and how he mobilized the homeless in their meals to do research. So he's a scientist, so he actually taught them the scientific method and how to do research. And as a result of their survey, they were able to talk with Garcetti, who was actually the one over their district at that time, and he supplied housing. The homeless people went to him, they asked for housing, and he brought it to their city around the specific type of housing they discovered was needed for single white men. And then organizing. And the last chapter of my book is looking at how 60 churches created 5,000 homes, all through community organizing in New York area. And then social movements. And I would say in some ways, homelessness is becoming, and housing is becoming, a social movement in the United States. It's in every major city, and city councils across the country are really starting to address this. So I'm not sure if it's really quite to that point, but it's hard to say. So this is just a framework for kind of how we're going up the stream in our whole course. And so I wanted you to be aware of that. We need to stop. I think I'm done. That's the last thing. You haven't seen me this whole time. Let me at least do a proper goodbye.
Stop share.
Stop
We've seen
share.
you.
Can you
Yeah, we've
see
been able
me?
to see you the whole time.
Okay.
Yeah.
You have? Oh, goodness. I didn't know that. I couldn't
Yeah.
see me. I assumed you couldn't see me.
You didn't do anything embarrassing, don't worry.
Well, I was just going to ask what I did that might have been pretty good. Did you see me kissing Anthony?
That's not embarrassing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. So I just want to close out again with a moment of prayer, and thank you for your diligence in this class and your willingness to be part of our first annual pilot program to see how it goes. So Rostin, would you mind being our prayer?
Tommy's hand was up. What's up, Tommy?
I was just going to ask, this slideshow, is that something we'll have access to at all?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if it will send through email. I may have to put it in 2 parts. It may be too big, but I'll definitely get it to you right
You know
away.
what? We can send it as a PDF.
Yeah, we'll put it into a PDF.
I was taking photographs of some of the slides not knowing, so.
I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Well, thank you guys. And really any evaluation, and I know that, I hear these compliments, and I love saying, hear what you're saying, Tommy, about our first week, but any effort you can put into writing up evaluations is really going to be helpful for our board. They need
Yeah,
to,
sorry about that. I keep forgetting to do the evaluation.
yeah, it's really going to help. So
Yep.
I'll send out a little evaluation on this too, and hopefully
Yeah.
it'll be real short. You guys can just fill it in. So
Could you resend the original evaluation from the initial trip? Yeah.
yeah, I'll resend that. Yeah. So you want to close us out, Rostin, with some prayer?
Actually, I wanted to give you guys another quick little update. So I told y'all that we've effectively ended veteran homelessness in Abilene, but because I'm the public relations chair for our local homeless coalition, that means in the next week, the mayor has our mayor has his State of the City address, which I got to write part of because of that
Wow.
position, and then at the end of the mayor's challenge, like we're having this big media event on Thursday. and I'm writing his speech for that as well, which is like really cool.
That's so
That's really fun.
awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Wow.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
You know, you're in a public place. I don't know how you feel about praying there. Shall I have Mercy pray? Would
Oh,
that
no,
be?
it's fine.
You're okay. All right.
It's Abilene. It's
Okay. All right.
Loving Father, thank you for this time that we've had together to talk about what it looks like to bring your kingdom closer to this earth. And we know that this is something that we cannot do without you, and we wouldn't want to do without you. And so any of the efforts that we make because of this, these conversations and any conversations that we have around this, we want you to be right in the middle of those. So I guess just continue making your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. We love you. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye,
And
guys.
have fun on your speech.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
End meeting.